Game begin.
I'm on the Facebook and Discord thanks to Magic the Gathering.
So people don't know this about us. You had sent me a Facebook friend request something like 15 years ago.
I know, and you finally like me enough to be my Facebook friend.
But I hadn't logged into Facebook for I don't know how many years. In fact, I only ever logged in again because of PSS4. Right?
This is like the inverse of the Dave Williams story, where we finally got to the bottom of why Dave Williams wouldn't text you back for years.
That's hilarious.
So wait.
This is even worse. You don't know the worst of it. I actually so you can tell the story, then I'll.
Okay, so Mike, we find out Dave Williams is going to Lobstercon, and we're like, oh, that's cool. And Mike made the comment on the podcast. He was like, oh, Dave Williams, like I tried to big time my son who is like interested in Dave Williams. I'm like, oh, well, he's my good friend. Here, I'll text him to show you. And then you text him and he just doesn't respond. And you're like, oh, well, but he responds to my tweets about the New York Times connections. Like he doesn't respond to my texts. So I finally get to introduce myself. I'm like, oh, hey, I'm Laney. I heard that Mike has been texting you and you haven't been responding. And I'm like, are you just big timing Mike? And Dave was just like, I haven't been getting texts from Mike. And he's just like, I mean, I changed my number like 7 years ago. Maybe that's what it is. And he pulls out his phone and is like, yeah, sure enough. Mike's just been texting the old number, like multiple like one-liner messages over years. Worst.
I had both numbers. I had the old number as Dave Williams, and I had his correct number as David Williams. He was in my phone with the correct number, and I was just texting Dave Williams. Like I actually had his correct number, but I just was texting the wrong number.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
That is really freaking crazy, right? Because he's just like, all right, all right, so let's fix this. And he's like, Mike, you literally have my number, and his picture is right there. And I'm like, David Williams.
David, who's this David Williams guy? Perfect. Well, welcome listeners to episode 3 of season 2 of the Spike Calling podcast. We are joined by the good doctor, Rich Shay. Probably the winningest Magic the Gathering online pre-modern monthly player of all time.
Is that a provable statement?
I mean, close enough, right?
I think William Hurst won 3 monthlies in a row.
No. He won 2. It was just 2. It was
only 2?
Yeah. It was with Stasis, and then it was with Psych Talk. So you won 2.
Do that.
I know he won 2 monthlies with Stasis lists that I basically gave him.
Oh, okay. So you won those. So it was actually you were the one who.
If you were to just take a random distribution of the population, let's say these 3 players, easily 33% of the people who would just easily be able to win consecutive monthlies, and one of them is it couldn't even have ever played in a monthly. Like that's how easy it is.
It's easy to win monthlies.
I was making a statistics joke.
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy for Rich Shay to win monthlies, right? Because between the 3 of us, Mike has played 0 matches of the online monthly. I've played probably
played the webcam monthlies. They're awesome.
I don't know. It never occurred to me to play in one.
Well, all right. I'll prioritize getting you to try hummus, but after that, you should definitely try to play in a monthly.
Maybe I would like it. I did real well in PSS this year.
It's
that's like a similar format, right?
I started during the pandemic, and that was, you're stuck at home. There's not much to do. And these online monthlies actually ended up being a great source of socialization of just you say hi to someone, you play cards for an hour through the power of the internet, and then off you go. And it's convenient because you play whenever you like, and you get to play over webcam. You get to see the other person's cards, so it's sort of a visceral experience, but at the same time, it's very convenient.
Don't mind it. So what's the current status of the monthly? So you won 2 in a row, and then you lost.
I lost to Gabe Farkas on Goblins, in the finals of
the most recent
of August, I think, and then I think I'm in the finals of September, but I'm waiting for other people to finish up their matches.
I see.
So you might win 3 out of 4 monthlies.
Are you still playing Replenish this month?
Yeah, Replenish. I love Replenish. I'm having it's such a good time.
I'm looking at the spreadsheet, and it looks like you are awaiting the outcome of the round of 8 between Flippy and Ben Tash. So you're in the top 4
of that one? Okay.
And Brad Tur is waiting the winner of your match in the finals. Brad is playing Lotus Vale Storm.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So the
that
monthly
deck can
scene.
beat the Rock.
Yeah, it certainly can, and it certainly will. So yeah, shout out to the monthly Andrew Walker, of course, coming up huge, month in and month out, running this.
He does a great job with it.
And in the past, of course, you've always been quite strong in the monthlies. I think you won the one shortly after Lobstercon, which was the first time that we saw, sort of the evolved form of the Parfait deck, which finally had Shard Phoenix added, right? That was like something like the June or July monthly after 22.
Shard Phoenix was a step up from Triskelion. I want to say Mark added that, but I don't remember. I could be wrong about that.
I mean, I know that in your interview with Mano following Lobstercon, you at least mentioned Shard Phoenix.
Okay.
And so
maybe he added the Ancestors Chosen.
Yeah.
I know that he pushed the build forward.
Yeah.
I think it was the Ancestors Chosen. Yeah. Okay.
What did you have at Lobstercon, Rich? Like Spike Weaver, Spike Feeder?
No, it was
It was Triskelion.
And then, but you had another creature, right?
It was
I think it was Chosen at that point.
No, it was Nishoba.
Oh, you're right,
Nishoba. Yeah.
I'm glad that you have a working memory, Lanny. I'm old,
So, Rich, I just wanted to say, I don't know if I've ever told you this. I think I've told Mano this, but that interview that you did after LobsterCon 2022? The one that we both top 8'd, both lost to Flint. That interview that you did with Mano is probably my favorite piece of Magic content of all time that I didn't create.
Coming from you, that means a lot, Mike.
It's really good. So our master plan on this was that you would do better in this episode of Spike Colony. So no pressure.
All you have to do is the two of you combined have to be better than Mano to extract a better interview from me. That's all you have to do.
I don't
plan on contributing anything.
I mean,
so
I think this is just not
like
we're
last
already
week,
starting behind.
I just said like a Federal Express story, and then Dr. Surf and Surf talked, and the people are like, "This is the best episode ever." I'm like, "Oh, let's get Rich on." Right? So I don't know, man. Like I could talk about. I played the Rock this week.
Well, we need to start the conversation off right. So there's 2 important topics at hand. The first important topic is, you have the floor for however long you need. Tell us what the deal is with bell peppers.
Okay. I don't know if you've ever eaten a bell pepper, but if you have, my condolences. Whenever I eat bell peppers, they taste horrible, and then if I eat them, my stomach's a mess. I'm basically allergic to them.
Is bell pepper, is it like the same? I'm going to say animal. I understand that it's not an animal. Is it the same animal as a capsicum?
Yeah, it's a capsicum.
It's one of the things in bell peppers, but bell peppers have less of that.
No, capsicum is a genus. Capsaicin is what makes things spicy.
Is an ingredient, right? So so that's what I was saying, because like I like certain kinds of peppers, but sometimes they're confused, and you get. Say the word, Lanny. I'm going to say capsicum.
Capsicum is the genus of flowering plants from the nightshade family Solanaceae, native to the Americas, and capsaicin is a chili pepper extract.
So one of them is an extract, one of them is the actual animal.
Yeah, well,
and again, I know it's not an animal.
Yeah, genus. Yeah, I mean, effectively.
So I think you might not like whatever the hell the word Lanny
This
said.
is all very educational to
You
me.
don't like bell peppers.
Well, bell pepper. No, I mean, if it mixes, it sounds like he's just allergic to bell peppers.
I think
which is a great shame because bell peppers are like one of the great things to dip in hummus.
That is a shame. To me, they taste terrible. They are terrible. There's nothing redeeming about them. But spicy peppers are no problem. I can eat very spicy foods. So if I go to a restaurant, I'm okay getting spicy food, but I have to make sure there are no bell peppers in it.
So if it's cooked, I
if it's cooked with bell peppers, I can't eat it. Anything that has bell peppers as an ingredient, I don't
like bell peppers. I don't have like an allergic reaction to them or anything. I don't like them, but I love other kinds of peppers. Like I love serrano peppers.
Sure.
I love jalapeno. I look all other kinds of peppers. Not all, but I mean there are many varieties of other peppers that I like. Shishito. Like I love them, I'm just indifferent to bell peppers. There's no particular.
Yeah. We're actually gonna have to, I guess, table this conversation before we dive deeper into why you would specifically be sensitive to bell peppers and not.
I've been trying to figure that out my whole life, and I really couldn't tell you.
Because hot peppers are just the same genus. They are also.
Are
capsicums.
they also capsicums?
They are also capsicums.
Because sometimes if I go to a Chinese restaurant and then they say like there's like capsicum in the ingredients versus having some other kind of peppers in the ingredients, I don't like the ones that say capsicum, but I often do like at the same restaurant or something. It just has a different pepper word.
That may be like if it's Chinese restaurant specific, that may be something lost in translation. But
interesting. Yeah. Like if I go to a Chinese food and I love Chinese food, I can tell them, give me as spicy as you can make this, and it's fine. But I also have to say no bell pepper, no red pepper, no green pepper.
Yeah. It's the Middle Eastern blood. So we also had a second very important topic. We were ranking when in the Spike Colony house. We were ranking the relative funness of talking about Magic, playing matches of Magic, winning Magic tournaments, and gaslighting people. And Michael J doesn't know this. You don't know what gaslighting people means?
Well, tell me in this context, because I don't understand.
In this context, it just means the same thing as any context. It's
just
like, do you enjoy playing Magic more or convincing people? Do you want to
destroy somebody's concept of reality more?
Yeah.
What? All right.
Yeah. Well.
Unpack that one for me.
Somebody doesn't know the order. He's probably never done some of the things in the list.
Well, it sounds like you have gaslighting very low, but Michael J doesn't know this, but Rich is choosing to join us today on the podcast instead of playing Magic, which basically stakes his claim that he believes that talking about Magic is more fun than playing matches of Magic.
I also believe that.
I'm not sure we can draw that conclusion given the data. The alternate hypothesis, given the same data, is that I think there is more community value in having content be created than I do from my sole participation in an event.
Oh,
that is amazing. I used to feel that way when I couldn't play very much, right? So I used to say there was like this 10-year span. I was pretty good in like around like 2006, and then I didn't play on the Pro Tour for 10 years, and then like the second my kids were like a little bit bigger, I decided I was good enough to play again. But during that entire stretch, I was just like, well, my contribution to the community isn't really as a player. My contribution to the community as a strategist, a content creator, etc. But man, the second I could actually sit at a table and shuffle cardboard again, I cared how well I did in tournaments again.
Oh, it's not that I don't care how well I do.
There are just larger things at hand, which brings us to the topic du jour. Rich, the deck that you have been... I
still need you to walk me through where gaslighting fits into this, because I'm confused.
Oh, well, I mean, gaslighting is just
the
awesome.
Rebel added the gaslighting.
Yeah. I mean, we were just discussing, we were basically discussing the relative merits of certain things. And, I mean, I guess I wasn't the one who added gaslighting. It was...
Rebel added.
Like we were just talking about it, and I don't know how it came up. Do you remember how it came up? Because we were just ranking these. We're like, so the problem is
basically we were just like we were in agreement. Winning tournaments is at the top. talking
Sure.
about Magic is high, actually playing Magic is low, but the relative value of winning tournaments is quite high, and you have to play Magic in order to win tournaments.
And
So
you
it's
also
somewhat-
kind of have to play Magic to talk about Magic. Like you don't. It's not mandatory, but
Oh,
it
no,
helps.
you don't. I wrote dozens of articles without ever playing Magic for years. So some of them were readable. But then we were just making fun of you or whatever and saying we were going to cancel you. So Rebel was like, "Oh, gaslighting is
It's just like this feeling that we're feeling
that
right
we
now
having right now that we're going to
is the
cancel
best.
Lanny is the best." So we put gaslighting on, but winning tournaments is the highest, which was validated by your victory in the Saturday consolation tournament. I
think I'll say it again. The winning the tournament was just not necessary. Like I probably should
actively chose not to play Magic and instead eat a ham sandwich.
I should have
in round 3.
But that's the thing is
your argument is going to be quite thin.
If I wanted to win the tournament, then I wouldn't have done that, right? And I think it was just like the feeling. I mean, like
Rich is so quizzical looking.
I think the top of the hierarchy is breaking it, right? Because you can break it and still not win the tournament. And I think breaking
breaking it is high. Breaking it is very high. Yeah,
So-
but that I would count that as winning the tournament. So, like, I would consider myself, for example, the 2009 Magic the Gathering Pro Tour World Champion.
Because you broke it, yeah.
And then I was also the 2000 U.S. National Champion, etc. Right?
Yeah.
I've won dozens of Grand Prix by this.
I mean, I consider, and I largely consider David Raska to be the weekend champion, the first side event and main event champion in Lobstercon history, if by proxy. And I think it's interesting to contemplate what would have happened if Selden had just, got the draw in the final round or caught like an extra loss, just from a bad match, like lost to contamination.
That didn't happen.
I know it didn't happen, or just like lost in the top 8. Like even if he just lost in the finals, like if he lost in the finals, people would just be like, well, Blue Black Dreadnought is a pretty great deck.
Rich, do you have enough context to answer the question now?
So, yeah, and I think the difficulty is that my paradigm is just different from this, because I don't think these things are so disparate that you can rank order them. The way I view it is that you can come up with a hypothesis or a set of hypotheses about where the metagame is, what should be done, how to tackle it, etc. That's maybe part of what you're talking about for discussing Magic, and that's good, but that is inert or dead if you don't manifest those hypotheses in practice, which is to say, perform the experiment of having one or more people or you take this conceptualized deck into a tournament and actually see how it does. And so I don't think you can
and
really
if in this process you can gaslight somebody
from each other. So I think that these actually are connected, and by trying to make them disparate, you don't fulfill the complete value of any of them, because you can't look at them in isolation.
So I would actually challenge you for a second, Rich.
Please.
And the reason I would challenge you is because clearly you are capable of breaking it. Clearly you are capable of winning tournaments. Clearly, in order to do some of those things, you've played Magic.
Yes.
You're
That's
great at
all that matters.
talking about Magic. Like I said, that Mano podcast is probably my favorite piece of Magic the Gathering related
that really means a
content
lot to me. That really does.
that I didn't create. The problem with your argument is that you have standing in you have too many checks in the check boxes, right? Not everybody is capable of all of those different things. And so you look at it and you're like, oh, well, from my global perspective, as somebody who can break it, win tournaments, has to go through the process of playing Magic in order to do those, etc., that these things are connected. However, the average schmuck, sitting up, maybe isn't necessarily capable. Maybe they are capable, but they haven't had the experience of all of those things. What do you think?
Well, I think it's like saying, what's best, the cheese or the tomato sauce or the dough? And I'd say that when you Voltron them together, you get a better experience of eating pizza than from any constituent component. In fact, if you sum together the constituent components, you would have a lower total value than if you ate pizza.
I watch so many Dave Portnoy, One Bite Everybody Knows the Rules videos per day, and they're all the same. And I watch multiple. And let me tell you, Rich, I had Bad Roman last night, and I think that the answer is the bread, because you can deconstruct pizza a bunch of different ways. You can have a tomato pie. You can have Chicago style pizza, which is basically a tomato pie casserole. You can have a white pie, which doesn't have any red sauce on it. These are all excellent or potentially excellent, and I love pizza. But I had something which was called garlic babka last night, which is exactly what it sounds like. And it ain't got no cheese, it ain't got no red sauce, and I would order another one for $8.
Oh,
right?
So breadsticks. Yeah, breadsticks are great.
It's babka. It is a babka.
I don't know what a babka is.
This is like not an effective argument, because Mike just starves himself of bread 6 days a week. So on the 7th day, when he breaks fast and has bread, it just nukes his senses. It's like it's overload to his entire. It's like a shock to the system.
I love pizza. Did I mention that?
Like
I love pizza.
Like when it hits, it's the only joy he feels in a week.
Some people are lactose intolerant. They're not going to be able to enjoy a mozzarella stick, much less a cheese pizza. Other people are celiac, so they can't eat the bread, but they can still enjoy a cheese stick. And so in vintage, many thousands of years ago when it was type 1, you just have people that are good at different things. Brassman is one of the best deck designers I've ever met. Andy Probasco. He was part of the old type 1 scene.
He beat me for a slot in 2006. I don't like him.
Really?
Yeah, he beat me for a slot. It was my own fault. I couldn't imagine how he could win the game, but he could.
He's a cool guy.
I literally was in the spot where I said, I cannot imagine how I can lose the game. And I was just looking at him and I'm like, I cannot imagine how you could win the game. And he's like, he needed to thread this needle so precisely and hit like 3 different legends. This was like standard. It was like when it was like Inkai, Servant of Oni, Maloku, Kiga, like all different. He needed to hit 3 consecutive individual legends like in a row to like get through. Like, and then he's like, he couldn't hit one of the legends in the wrong order, right? Like he needed to ink eyes me into Maloku to stay alive, and then greater good Kiga my position, like all like in this incredibly narrow thing. And I'm like, I couldn't imagine how I could lose this game, but he could imagine this game. But it's all right. I want to slot the next weekend, but I've always not liked him as a result of that.
He's a good guy, and he is a brilliant deck designer. And I mentioned
I'll hear nothing nice about him.
What's that?
I'm just joshing you. I mean, he beat me fair and square.
I mentioned him as someone whose deck building ability is much higher than his ability to make those decks work.
That makes me feel terrible.
I'm not saying he's a bad player. I'm saying that his deck building
was undefeated
very
going
high.
into the slot round.
Should have bought him out.
And you do have people who
are so dominant. Like, why would we buy him?
You have people that are just going to enjoy parts of the game more. So I think it's a very individualized thing, right? I mean, that's, some people like playing The Rock. I don't know, but some people enjoy the experience.
So we had a new venue this week, right? So Lanny
it's like Sisyphus has gotten Stockholm syndrome.
So
like he's just become obsessed with the object that he can't get to the top of the hill, and he's like, surely this time I'm gonna be able to roll this to the top. He gets 45% of the way there. It rolls back down to the ground, and he's like, nevertheless.
So, it's a true story. Lanny sets us up with a new brewery, so we have a great turnout for our in-person Brooklyn meetup. Lanny shows up, and so I'm gonna play "Fuck It We Call." "Fuck It We Call" is "Fuck It We Ball," but
I have no idea what you're saying.
With "Call of the Herd," right? So "Fuck It We Ball" is Ball Lightning, right? But "Fuck It We Call" is like the red deck, but they splash for "Call of the Herd." So
is
I reach
modern or something.
No,
it's pre-modern.
Okay, so you have a
try to keep up, Rich. Come on,
Rich.
So people in New York are moving so quickly.
Yeah, so
I'm walking here.
I'm gonna play Fuck It We Call, right? So I go to reach over, and then I think to myself, it's gonna take me about 20 minutes to like re-sleeve these Call of the Herds, and then also like find the second Tranquil domain that I need. So I'm just, instead of doing that, I'm just gonna play the deck that has the Call of the Herds in it, which is the Rock. So I get to the meetup, and this is like a blinged out meetup. Multiple people have brought prizes for the winner of this meetup, including a Belt of Giant Strength, which is a contemporary card, but everybody signs it because, like, you know, we talk about winning the belt. Bill Ellis has bought a WWE Championship belt so that whenever somebody wins a meetup, they could have their photo taken with it. I'm like, if I knew all of this bling was going to happen, I would have picked a real deck. Anyway, at the 2-0, Lanny beats me with some absurd deck. And so he's making fun of me.
Goose knot.
The only thing that I'd ever done with that Rock in those sleeves was lose to Lanny on camera. That was the sleeves had one match of play underneath them, right? And so
it was a best of 5, and we played all 5 games.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm just gonna play this. I'm at 2-0 in a 4-round meetup, and I'm like, I'm already past expectation at 2-0.
Yeah, you got the Rock. You rolled the Rock halfway up the hill. And then guess what happens? What happens when you make it halfway up?
Catches up. So anyway, then Lanny went to the finals and lost to a deck perhaps even more embarrassing than the Rock. But it was played by Andy Levine, top 8 competitor at Lobstercon this year, and an ace of all the decks people don't like. He's the person who put Mono Blue Tide on the map in New York. Obviously did awesome at Lobstercon. Andy Levine beat Lanny with a deck, I would say, even more embarrassing than the Rock.
And what is that? And have I ever heard of it?
Imagine a color that is embarrassing in pre-modern. What color would you choose?
Probably green.
Man, I love Rich so much.
All right, Rich, play along.
I am.
All right, imagine the second worst color.
Everyone would say black.
Sure. Okay.
Green.
Now imagine forcing everybody else to play that.
Guys blessing your non-green cards back into your deck.
Fair. Oath of Druids.
So Andy,
right into non-green creatures. Okay, so sure. So was it a Pox deck? I love Pox.
Terrible.
Andy defeated Lanny playing Contamination Control.
Okay, that's cool. I like that deck.
When you say you like that deck, would you actually play it?
No, I wouldn't. But it's a cool deck.
It's a cool
When you
deck.
say cool, you mean you never would have thought of this.
I would not have thought of it, no.
Those are the impressions that I get when I say that. I'm like, I never would have thought of this.
I would not have. I listened to that podcast that Alvaro did with William about the deck, and it's just a really interesting approach to the game.
Alvaro actually did that podcast with Mano.
Oh, okay.
Which is pretty fun.
See, you have a better memory than I do.
A few.
We just remember who's on the Mano's podcast.
Yeah.
You'll be my age one day. See?
One day. Maybe I won't. Maybe I won't make it.
Ooh. Inshallah, you will.
So, anyways.
This, by the way, I think is the difference between the Mano approach to podcast and the Spike Colony, which is with Mano, we are going to do a deep dive on a deck, and we're going to delve into every single card, and we're going to talk about why this and why that. And here, we're basically hanging out at a bar without the bar, having a drink, but without the drink. And it's very conversational, bringing up our favorite stories, etc. So this is much more like a hanging out, having fun podcast, as opposed to delving into Magic-specific content.
You heard it here first. All Things Considered is a serious Magic.
Yeah, it's the Spike. It's the podcast for Spikes. Is
just some folks having a drink at the corner watering hole.
It's actually important for us to get this section of the podcast done because our market research shows that the longer the podcast runs, the more popular it is somehow.
Oh, like that makes sense.
There's literally just a linear relationship between podcast runtime and total listener count. It's just it's unbelievable because it just goes against all instincts about like what could we live in the era of like 4-second videos on social media, and yet Our podcast does better once it cracks the 2-hour mark. But rest assured, if you are still listening, which we know you are because the hangs have been great so far.
Because stats.
We do plan on talking about Replenish. We have three of the most Replenishy players in North America on the call. Incidentally, as it turns out.
That's true.
Sort of representative of, between the three of us, we've played Replenish through effectively every metagame of pre-modern. So
that's true. Flores just crushed it at Lobstercon with Squeeplenish some time ago, and that was legitimately awesome.
Thank you.
That was great. And then Lanny, you walloped me with, I don't think I've ever taken a beating that bad. That was 2 games in a row, Mox, Soland, Wave, Opal.
And I would just like to point out I did it without knowing how the stack worked.
I remember that episode. Let's not get into that. That was bad. That wasn't good content.
The reviews are in. It's kind of hard to, encapsulate this discussion about Replenish because, I don't even know where to begin. Like, I think if you start with Mike's build that had, effectively this just like destroy red deck plan of, solitary squee, available to it, but the numbers were just kind of, all over the place. One Swords to Plowshares main deck.
One is a miracle.
Some may say a quarter of the amount you should say. Some might say just a half the amount you should play. Careful Study was still in the deck in Mike's conception, which of course is more validated because of the presence of Squee.
I would point out that is the card that Flint duressed out of my hand in our top one.
Yeah, Careful Study notably will
strand 2 squeeze in Mike's hand.
Will con you into keeping one-landers more often with the deck. Sideboard wasn't too different, just kind of your mix of Fact or Fiction, Counterspell type effect. But you did have the Thawing Glaciers, which was huge. And definitely an approach. I loved your justification of Thawing Glaciers, which is like, I'm never going to lose to the rock if I have Thawing Glaciers. I'm like, you're playing Replenish. You're just never going to lose to the rock.
Well, I would just more like to point out my innovation of Abeyance, maybe. Mana Short was good in my deck. I did find room for the other 3 Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah. Swords to Plowshares on the sideboard. I think Abeyance is, I think Abeyance is pretty excellent in a Replenish, and I like it. I like it. Yeah, I like it over every copy of Orm's Chant for the most part. I may go to 3 Abeyance and then 1 Orm's Chant if I was going to run 4 of such effects, but I would probably run.
I think it depends how many Dreadnought players you want to beat versus certain other types.
You'll beat the. As we've come to learn, the more likely thing that you lose to is not Fire Exceed Dreadnought, and it is instead either Parallax Tide or, in Rich's case, Brain Freeze. So different things have been done. So when I picked up the deck, I wasn't really. I guess we should mention that in between the next sort of evolution of the deck came with Fluffy and I believe Czech Mano, Czech or Swedish Mano. I think one of the. I guess it could be Polish. That would make a lot of sense too, or Greek. Sorry, it's probably Greek, right? Or no, Mano might be. I don't know. European Mano. And it's probably not even that, but I know it's Fluffy. Fluffy makes a version of the deck that just has 4 of everything. We could literally name the list. It's like all 16 4-drops, all 4 Attunement, Intuition, Frantic Search, 24 lands, and 4 Plowshares, 4 Seal of Cleansings. Like that's literally. I don't think I missed a single card in the list. So I thought that deck was really cool. He did pretty good with it, just sort of playing in the online scene. I think they might have talked about it on either Monster of the Week. I think it was Monster of the Week because Anton's a big Replenish fan, so they kind of all got together and sort of deck teched and talked about some stuff. I picked up the deck and I just sort of found space for Mox Diamond. We've talked about it on this podcast a lot. The downside of Mox Diamond's card disadvantage is negated by the card advantage created by Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. And then it adds a little bit of fixing and a little bit of speed so that you don't have to kind of try to solve speed matchups by committee, because different cards beat different decks. Swords to Plowshares, Hydroblast, Chill, Sphere of Law, like a bunch of these cards kind of have different fits, and like the better thing than all of those, sort of in my opinion at the time, was to just combo a turn faster instead of trying to stop your opponent.
Yep.
I also
a very high ceiling.
Yeah, you have the potential to cast turn 1 Parallax Wave. You have the potential to cast turn 1 Exalted Angel. I really loved the Exalted Angels on the sideboard. I went from 3 to 4. Then Replenish is a little bit quiet. It becomes a sort of weird time. So we're in like September of last year. And then we go into January of this year when the Ponza Oath deck rises. And I think most people, upon seeing the Ponza Oath deck for the first time, didn't really have the idea that Replenish beats this deck, which I thought was interesting, because I felt the same way. It was just like, well, you're going to get all your lands blown up and you're going to be under Sphere of Resistance and then you're never going to win. And then a weird thing happens where Paul Master, I think, is maybe the first to do this. Pablo Marcos, big online crusher, just plays Sabo's Web main deck in Replenish and uses it as his weapon of choice to sort of dominate the online scene, which had an oversaturation of Ponza Oath. And then finally, after this whole story arc, we see Rich. I think your attention to the deck probably came right around the sort of Mana Leak innovation, which is that Andy Culpepper?
Andy Culpepper putting Arcane Denial in the deck.
Right. Which had been in and out of the sideboard.
The deck never appealed to me until I saw Andy Culpepper's build with Arcane Denial. I have two main rules for deck building, which I'll be glad to share. The first one, you've more succinctly just called it the prime directive, but for years, many years, I've been saying that you shouldn't work on a deck if there is another deck such that the other deck has no worse matchups, but some better matchups. And the second rule of deck building is never mid-range.
Never the rock.
So before, I always looked at Replenish, and I thought, okay, this is a pure combo deck, that's fine, but why not play Fed? Why not play Angry Hermit? Why not play any of the other really cool combo decks that are one turn faster? And then the unlock for me was seeing Andy's build, and it clicked. Oh, this is not a combo deck. This is a combo control deck. And then all the pieces came together. Then I understood what it was trying to do.
What is it trying to do?
Well, I know on this podcast you talk a lot about gears, and it's not quite the language that my brain uses to process, but I would say more roles. And the average combo
that's
deck.
a 1999 Mike Flores article.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We're
Never
like
heard of it.
We're in 2003 now.
Right, but old things are good, new things are bad. So if we're taking the average combo deck, let's say Fluctuator, it only has one, you might call it a gear or a role. It does its thing and hopes that good things will happen. It has one dance, it performs the dance, and hopes that good things are the result. But a control combo deck is a deck that starts the game either shoving a threat toward the opponent or soaking up what the opponent's trying to do before unleashing its win condition. So the power, I think, of this type of deck, this archetype of deck, is being able to basically be the beatdown, be the control, and rapidly swap between them.
I thought we never mid-range.
Yeah.
You're literally just describing mid-range.
No, I'm not. Mid-range. Mid-range is, well, I'm just going to draw my cards and play them and hope that good things happen to me.
That's how I play Replenish. Well, sometimes I tap out for 4 every turn. Sometimes my opponent's permanents all disappear.
We actually had this conversation on Spy Colony where I was just saying that I essentially agree with Rich here, which is that mid-range needs to be reconceptualized, because a lot of the decks that we call mid-range like really are like no gear. And that the gears theory is just that a lot of good decks are mid-range decks in disguise. So Burn becomes a mid-range deck, Replenish becomes a mid-range deck, and amongst various other examples, like, you know, even Dreadnought now is starting to look like a mid-range deck simply because, I mean, combo control is a good way to put it, but another way to phrase combo control is to use gears, because gear 1 is combo and gear 2 effectively, or gear 2 and gear 3, depending on context, is effectively control.
Let me just give a riff on what Lanny's saying. Let's not talk about this in terms of Replenish for a second, because Replenish actually fills the gears.
Are we going to talk about modern Burn again?
No, we're going to talk about the Rock.
This podcast, we're talking about modern Burn.
The Rock doesn't have a combo draw, right? So it doesn't have...
Sure, yeah, okay.
Right? So, and the Rock, I mean, its inevitability is pretty thin, right? So in the match that I had against Lanny, I duressed him. I duressed or Cabal Therapy to him, revealing the fact that he had a third Armageddon in his deck. So I dealt with 2 Armageddons already, and I was just like, oh wow, he has a third Armageddon in his deck. So I immediately Dust Bowled his Gemstone Mine, which is a terrible Dust Bowl target, and he has a Plains and 2 Islands in play. So I'm like, wow, my quote, I'm ahead in this game. I'm ahead in air quotes, and I'm like, my ability to remain ahead is pretty contingent on Lanny just not drawing any mana source until I could kill him with a Treetop Village, and there is an Armageddon in his hand. So my gear 3 is pretty thin. So I think like what you're saying is you don't like decks that only got gear 2.
Well, he just doesn't like decks that are bad.
Step out of the gear framework and try to express what I'm saying without gears. I don't like the fact that the Rock strategy, and I'm not saying the Rock is bad. I'm not actually saying it's a bad deck. I'm saying
we'll say it's bad. It's like you don't have to tarnish your good name. We'll say that it's bad.
I don't enjoy playing it, and it's because I don't like decks where you pick up a card from the top of your deck and you put it on the table, and then you do the same thing the next turn, and you are just sort of marching forward. There's no point on the horizon that you're aiming for. There's no narrative arc that you're affecting in the game. And I want a deck that has that narrative structure. I want a deck that actually has a point in the horizon toward which everything trends. Now, a good combo control deck is a deck that can play like a blue-white control deck up until the point where that pivot happens and then the game ends. And that is rare to find in pre-modern. Basically a deck that looks like blue-white control, but you never get to the point where you're attacking for 3 with your Treetop Village and hoping your opponent doesn't win before you somehow exhaust his life total.
Only has 7 turns.
Right, yeah, exactly.
That's it.
So I don't want that. I want a deck where I can counter my opponent's spell, I can Seal of Cleansing permanents, but when you flip the switch, the game's over.
Yeah, I actually really like this phrasing, because what you're describing kind of has a... what you're describing really is sort of like 2 different ways to like be in a quote-unquote grindy game, which is that you're not shy about rock or mid-range style gameplay in which you try to be ahead advantageously in exchanges, right? The concept, the whole point of playing Magic, has this chess-like quality of creating stronger position for yourself, making exchanges that are favorable to you, and then eventually winning the game. Now, what you like is more so like, okay, well, something needs, like, it's a different type of game to play where you make an exchange and you're like, that netted me 1 mana, that netted me a fraction of a card, that netted me some amount of life. It's really obnoxious to play in games like those when the next card that you draw might not accomplish the same sort of linear goal that you set up with your prior play, right? So the Rock actually does have a goal. Sam Black kind of introduced this concept. He uses a lot for limited analysis, but when applied to constructed, he uses the concept of a small game or a big game. And the Rock is essentially just trying to put your opponent and yourself to zero, as close to zero resources as possible, and in hopes that you win by having 0.25 resource to your opponent 0. And so every move is just conceptualized to trying to grind it out, but you just grind until 0. It's not grind until you top deck Fire Blast or Replenish or maybe not Oath of Druids, but your Phyrexian Dreadnought or something. Right. And so all decks that have interaction and even some decks that don't use the conception, like use the axis of grinding. Like a Goblins deck can play for more value, and Goblins is much more linear than the Rock, because Goblins sort of can always basically say like, well, I'm going to win this game by having a goblin on the battlefield and trying to put my opponent to 0. With the Rock, it's just like, well, you're kind of attacking their hand, you're kind of blocking sometimes. You kind of have this treetop village thing, but you can board into Haunting Echoes, you can have Recurring Nightmare, and it's we've talked about it, we've joked about it, you've mentioned all the time, this sort of horizon point is basically saying, well, the Rock doesn't really have a plan. Right. But I think more specifically, the Rock doesn't have a consistent plan. It needs to change plan every draw step. If you start flooding out, you have to, what matters in the match might be something that didn't matter beforehand. And I think, every good example of a successful mid-range deck, that has performed well in its format, is capable of maybe stringing together more coherent plans. And every successful version of the Rock in recent pre-modern history contains cards like Natural Order or Survival of the Fittest, which help linearize the deck. They still use the grindy tools, but
doesn't it just give the Rock a capability to play a bigger game and maybe a more cohesive strategic game, or maybe what Rich would say is a plan, right? If I suddenly can get a 7/7 on turn 3, like, and other Rock decks can't do that, right? Like, I now have a 7/7's pretty hard to beat for some decks, Right. Or if I'm playing against a different matchup, the ability to find silver bullets that make it so they can't play, right? Or they need 3 cards for when they used to think they only needed 1 card, right? I now have a thing I'm aiming for, right? Versus just throwing darts into the darkness,
right? I mean, and I think, ultimately, like, when we move over to this concept of Replenish, I think you end up getting a very simple idea, which is at some point you're going to top deck your Replenisher Intuition. The game's going to go away, and thus choosing what you're doing with your cards. Your cards also tell you they're part of the story anyways. It's just like, there's not that much you can accomplish with a Parallax Tide.
But it can do a lot.
Effectively, right? But it still just removes lands, or sometimes untaps your own lands, or sometimes you can use it to cheat your opponent if you don't understand the rules.
You've talked about, though, right? Sometimes you attack for 4. I like the fact that Replenish has this incremental game that it can play, and that was what I saw unlocked when Andy added those counters main. but you can also just crush your opponent with this combo. And so if you compare that to something like Angry Hermit has that one mode, which is just win, and there's no incremental game. Or there's The Rock, which only has one mode, or which is, again, be a mid-range deck and hope for good things to happen to you. But what I like about Replenish is that sometimes it's a bad reanimator deck where you just reanimate your whole graveyard and you win. Sometimes it's a blue-white control deck.
Wait, isn't that a good reanimator deck? I was thinking like a bad reanimator deck is like sometimes you just make a 4/4 and hope it gets there. Right?
Well,
that's what I thought you were
sometimes
saying.
you're a good version of The Rock, where you just pay 4 mana for your 4/4, and then you pay 4 mana for another 4/4.
Yeah,
you actually pay 8 mana for the first 4/4.
Yeah, I won a lot of games, because I didn't know how the stack worked. But I won a lot of games with just a Parallax Wave and an Opalescence in play, and hoping my opponent couldn't beat Infinite Vigilance, right?
Yes, that's a good version of The Rock. That's what I'm saying. Imagine if The Rock could pay 8 mana to build its own 4/4 completely unremovable vigilance thing that also wipes out all of the opponent's creatures.
Not their Wildfire Emissaries. Not their Ilson Shades.
Yes, or Mongoose.
Yes, yes. There, now we're speaking my language. You, of course, dominate the Mongoose on the battlefield thanks to...
Just battle.
By being a 4/4. No, I'm totally with you. I mean, I think it's interesting because your conception of this being a combo control deck arriving once counterspell effects entered the main deck was what other people had conceived about the deck before. So they effectively were like, well, one thing that we do, so, generally speaking, you look at your list, you have 3 Mana Leak, you have 2 Seal of Cleansing, 2 Swords of Plowshares. Other versions of Replenish just had more Seal of Cleansing, more Swords of Plowshares. Yeah. And it gave them this control mode, which if you ask me, I think that people like my conception of the deck is that it's always a combo deck, because my conception of a control deck is maybe more in tune with your conception of a mid-range deck, which is just that I think control decks essentially play to stop what your opponent's doing, and winning is irrelevant, right? It's just to completely exhaust your opponent of ability to win. And
I don't think mid-range decks do that. Mid-range decks just throw duresses around and hope that comes up the works enough.
I'm the opposite of Lanny. Lanny makes fun of me because he always says that I think Burn is a bad combo deck, and I make fun of people who only do 17 points of damage with Burn. But I play Burn like it's a mid-range deck, so he always kind of makes fun of me. But I also play Replenish like it's a mid-range deck. When people talk to me about how they play Replenish, I'm always looking at them side-eye, why would I play into a situation where your cards worked, right? They're like, well, what if I have a Tormod's Cryptic play? I'm like, I don't know. How are you going to stop me from just casting my 4s? Right? That's how I always played.
You do have a mid-range mode in Replenish, and that is actually one of the strengths. For Burn, I play it like an aggro combo deck, and I think it's like one of those candies that has one flavor on the outside, but then eventually you get to the other flavor inside. And to me, that's what Burn is. You start off.
It's just a gusher filled with fire blast.
We're an anti-analogies podcast. I don't know if you knew that.
Anti-analogy. Okay, how about metaphors?
So anything that requires you to stretch your imagination past the most linear explanation of something, we're mostly against that.
And I will simply say that Burn, the way I conceptualize it and the way I like to play it, is a beatdown deck until the beatdown deck stops working, and then you're a combo deck. And that 1-2 punch is actually really tough for a lot of decks to handle.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement of that, and most people who've experienced Burn sort of feel that as well. But I think, on the topic of Replenish, it is kind of fascinating to me because Replenish is one of the most we have 3 people here who all experience the deck quite differently. We have dozens more in the Discord internetverse that also experience the deck super differently. And that's what's super ironic, is because for the most part, we can agree that we all have relatively shared experiences with a deck like Burn, where it's just like, yeah, well, so you put creatures on the battlefield. It's pretty evident that you should attack with them. Every now and then you might be able to make an effective block. Maybe your opponent is shipping in.
Never happened.
Well, maybe your opponent is your opponent's shipping in a Blastoderm. You have a Mog Fanatic on the battlefield. I'm holding.
I have blocked with the Grim Lavamancer just to get a card into my graveyard so I could use my other Grim Lavamancer.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've done that. That's
cannibalization.
So and when we get into discussions about Burn, what ends up happening is like, well, really there's just like a lot of nuance. So we play, if you give three different pilots the same Burn seat, a lot of games are going to play out in a very similar fashion regardless of the pilots. It's just the fringe games.
They're not even going to know whether they're supposed to go first or second.
I'm talking about a range. So there's a large range of games where it seems like the Burn players would navigate them the same, just because their hand is relatively scripted, right? There's a lot of things we know. We know that on turn 1 you should cast Jackal Pup instead of Bolting Face, and a lot of stuff kind of like cascades from that. Sure. So
if you're playing against Fran, you sit down, your opponent is Fran. Are you sure you play a first or Jackal Pup instead of?
Hell yes! Yeah, oh my god! Oh yeah, we're not getting sidetracked by this. With Replenish, it's interesting because we can't actually decide what cards should be in our deck to begin with, and then
I agree. I built the deck differently than literally everyone else.
Yeah, and
you didn't put 26 lands and 4 Mock Simons in your deck, though.
I put 26 land in, and no one else does.
Lanny would put 26
land
and 4 Mock Simons.
Okay, so Lanny and I are the only 2 people that put 26 land in the deck.
We're certainly the loudest about it. I know that some people listen to us. I mean, Fran, I think when he took the deck for a spin for the first time, played 26 lands. I've been definitely interested in trying to push the envelope. I've been pretty outspoken about the card Attunement.
I love Attunement. That card is so good.
And we actually talked a lot about Attunement on the drive over, because Landy Ho is also a huge Attunement fan.
Yeah.
And I have simply reached the conclusion that I think that you guys just get so far ahead like that it doesn't matter that Attunement is card disadvantage.
Well, it's not card disadvantage. It's like lending someone a bunch of money. It'll eventually be paid back, and you get to accrue the interest in the meantime. So you're down cards, but they'll come back to you.
Analogies.
But yeah, even
you lose to Attunement will be more than made up for, not only by casting Replenish, but also by the card advantage of setting up one of your Parallax combos. There's a non-allegorical way to put it, Mike.
But
Noted.
I mean, we're all over the map here, but maybe we should talk about lists. Maybe we should talk about matchups. We're still deep in theory. I think that the bottom line is, I guess I would just ask you. It's like, where have you noticed? So you play 26 lands. Where are other places that you see yourself?
I actually don't let Rich answer that question yet. I just want to point something out. There's about something that Richard once said to me, and then it also has to do with Attunement. Number one, when I was complaining about land tax and stuff, Rich was just like, what card's really broken? Phyrexian Dreadnought.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking back, like I was in a situation once. I was actually when I was playing against Flint, and I had Opalescence Attunement, and I thought it was some bullshit that I couldn't block with my Attunement and then just like return it to my hand, and that the stupid Dreadnought was going to trample over. And that's just some straight up bullshit. I just wanted to point that out.
It makes sense, right? This giant robot monster's attacking, and then your enchantment that somehow come to life blocks it, but then it just flips away, and the robot monster shrugs its robot shoulders and walks forward and punches you.
I feel like the Attunement should be able to block there successfully.
Well,
and it's bullshit that I was taking 12. I don't like
this
it.
giant robot monster. It's this little squishy enchantment that is not even there when the robot is about to deliver its robot punch.
Yeah. Save for when opalescence is there. The enchantment is merely the concept of the ability to be aware of and responsive to another person's emotional needs and moods, adopted by practitioners of the pseudoscientific discipline of energy medicine.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
And without that standing in the way, the robot just punches right on through.
I feel like Lanny has used a lot of like Wikipedia during this episode. I think he might have been consulting Chat GPT or something this whole time, just in order to sound smarter. But I would never do that, and you could tell by my answers.
But what would happen if you put a capsicum in front of the fire extinguisher right now?
Ooh. That's a great
In
question.
any case, you get shrimp and peppers, which I think is
I don't need either of those.
a fair Cajun-inspired meal.
Sounds great.
All
Did I
right.
tell you I had Bad Roman last night? They have their own Altoids.
All right.
That sounds horrible.
The question that I was getting to is, so you saw Andy Culpepper's list. This was a Arcane Denial list, and we've ended up here. We have 26 lands. We have 3 Mana Leak. We have 2 Plowshares, 2 Seal Cleansing. I guess I'll run it all the way down. 26 lands, usual suspects, all 12 of the blue-white duals in the form of Skycloud Expanse, Flooded Strand, a Dark Waste, 4 Plains, 4 Island, 2 City of Traders, 4 Ancient Tomb. So already with the mana base, we have City of Traders, so it's like 26, but sometimes it behaves like 25
16
or
of
fewer.
each color, and then I think you want 26 total land.
Yeah, totally. And then going down to the sort of Replenish squad, we have 4 Replenish, 3 Opalescence, 3...
It could be 3 or 4 Opalescence.
Yeah, it looks like there's a 4th Parallax Wave hiding.
So 3 or 4 Wave, 3 or 4 Tide, 3 or 4 Opal, 3 or 4 Leak, 4 Attunement, 4 Replenish, definitely. Approximately 2 Swords. I could see moving in either direction depending on your metagame. I don't think it's wrong to have more than 2. And then I really like my 1 Stifle. One wouldn't be wrong either. 1's fine.
Yeah, we've got some fun. We've got some fun ups here. We've been playing with Fact or Fiction. We've been playing with Impulse. We've been playing with Stifle. Whether or not to run.
Did not work out. I didn't like Impulse. That was an experiment, but that's just going to become another frantic search.
Right. I mean, I think things get very interesting past. I'm kind of trying to save this for another segment, but just kind of like trying to figure out what's next, or like what kinds of cards motivate you to do different kinds of things. Because I think Impulse is played in nearly every blue combo deck. It's played in mono blue Dreadnought, of course. Wow. It's played in blue red Devourer, and so and I of course I actually like it quite a bit in Replenish, but I think that once you go down that path, you kind of have to continue. You can't just like jam Impulse in and then expect everything to be the same. But I think you can jam Impulse in and then see how that affects things downstream, and then make adjustments as such.
Let me sort of take a step back and try to explain how I build the list. Now, Lanny, you've also been an adherent of 26 land, but you've also run into, let's call it, the flooding problem, where you get too many of these land. Monk's Diamond is a potential solution to that. What I'm trying to do with my lists, I'll call it an inverted Xerox approach. In a Xerox deck, you don't play enough land, and you play a bunch of cantrips, and you use your cantrips to hit your land drops, and then to mitigate subsequent land drops. Whereas in the replenished lists with Attunement and Frantic Search, I think that you can actually do the opposite, where you play too much land, or you play enough land, but you mitigate flooding by having looting cards that let you just dump excess land later. And the theory is that you'll win more games by making all of your land drops and then eventually dumping those excess land for action later in the game than you would by playing fewer land and losing some games because you don't make your first 4 land drops.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with that. I think that was why it always felt crazy to not run excess lands in a deck that had, access to so many looting effects.
Right.
But I mean, if we're going to start talking about the problems with Replenish, then, we're going to kind of go down another. I mean, I guess we basically chose too deep of a deck to completely encapsulate. But I think the looting problem is the flooding problem. And to be clear, Mox Diamond doesn't help solve any deck's flooding problems, right? Like if you don't draw enough gas, then you're just going to lose. And Mox Diamond is definitively not gas. Like it requires you to have already drawn things to do with your mana. And, it was basically...
You always make Mox Diamond look good to me, Laney. Like every time you have it.
Yeah, but I think conceptually people need to have...
It's demolished.
I think conceptually people need to have a more robust understanding that Mox Diamond is a card that kind of represents air, and like the rest of your deck needs to be like a very, very good supporting cast where a few things have to happen. One, you need to continue to make the land drops that you're required to make after you play the Mox Diamond, right? Because otherwise it's just effectively a Lotus Petal.
Well,
and then...
things. One, first of all, I'm convinced by Rich's argument because, as you know, I like to divide by 0 no matter how small, right? And Rich has technically divided by 0 in his in his argument, right? Here is a thing that mitigates drawing too many lands. That is true, and you're saying, well, you don't get that much advantage out of it. And what Rich said is still true, right? So that's a divide by 0 moment. So I'm with Rich. B, I think that the looting in response to flooding is the smartest thing that's going to come out of this podcast. I didn't think about it that way.
How do you not?
Never thought about it.
It's because he put Squee in his deck, so he just was so excited to activate attunement, look down at 2 Squee and 4 lands, and think to himself, it's like, well, this is amazing. Squee's doing all the work when he just pitched the 4 lands.
I didn't even understand how the stack worked. You're surprised?
Anyways,
I don't hate Squee in the deck. It's not that Squee's a bad card. I think Careful Study's a bad card in the deck.
Yeah, and Squee is one of the only ways to make...
I beat a lot of red players.
Careful Study...
Point out.
Your build of that deck is not bad. It's not. I don't like Careful Study because I think 1 mana, draw 2, discard 2 doesn't quite give you enough. Whereas I think Frantic Search is a whole different story.
I played that.
Negative 1 mana.
I played Attunement.
All right.
I played 26 lands.
It's just much worse than the alternatives. Much worse than the first 8. And then I would also rather play a Cephalid Coliseum if I'm not playing Web in the 75.
Yeah. As
the 9th looting card if you need that.
I mean, I love Cephalid Coliseum in this deck, and even if I am gonna have Sabo's Web at some point, I'm just gonna keep that baby untapped, until I activate it. Anyways, what I was saying about Mox is that Mox is air. Like, it is not like Chrome Mox or Mox Opal, or obviously a real Mox in that you cannot play Mox Diamond instead of lands. So What do? You play instead of non-lands. It's like, okay, well,
yes.
As Raska astutely pointed out, when he was analyzing Grotog versus Phyrexian Dreadnought, he was just like, well, you're a deck that has 4 Moxes and I'm a deck that has 0 Moxes. So your deck has 4 fewer cards that do something that matter. And he's absolutely right about that because
do an entire podcast on the problems of that.
If you basically compare the decks side by side, both decks actually have the same card advantage. They both have 4 Gush, and that is where the card advantage ends. But they don't have the same card disadvantage. Now, foil is card disadvantage, so things get a little bit more nuanced. But the fact of the matter is, you're just starting.
Foil is card disadvantage when you want it. You have a lot of agency.
Absolutely.
Over when you foil, and you can eventually grow to the point where foil is not card disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that was very astute analysis. It's actually wild. It's actually wild to me because I think that don't compare it to Mox Opal or Chrome Mox, I guess. I'll just leave it at that. Like those,
they're very different cards.
Those cards are mana sources. Mox Diamond is not a mana source.
Mox Diamond is color fixing, but you can't include it as a mana source in your deck. You can include it when you're calculating if you have enough of every given color.
It's a very powerful mana Silex.
I think that what's hidden here is that what Rask is making his argument is comparing 60s or 75s against 60s or 75s, and the average person is only really calibrated to compare 7s against 7s, and that in order to compare 60s against 60s, you also have to think about how decks perform over time, right? So just like, okay, I can't compare 60s against 60s if my opponent is Fluctuator, right? Like, the game will end far too quickly for us to compare 60s against 60s, right? But I can compare 60s against 60s if I have an expectation that this game's going to go 30 turns, right? Like, that's a very different math problem.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, in this use case, that's exactly what Flint does with the transformative Fluctuator plan.
You still draw your 70, your 7 out of the 60, right?
Yeah, but when you say, like, okay, when Lanny's talking about the same card advantage, but like more air in the mono blue versus Growatog matchup. Mm-hmm. One of the things about having Mox Diamond in your deck, one of the fundamental advantages of what makes Mox Diamond a powerful card to play in pre-modern is that it shortens games, right? Like, the games are effectively over faster because somebody has an explosive start for Mox Diamond, which shifts many games, and not every game, obviously, but shifts many games from being a game about resources into a game about time. Because now, because of the thing that Mox Diamond represented, this is, I think, best encapsulated when Oath Peluche plays like a first turn Sphere of Resistance. The game is often over, right? Like, right there.
A great point, Mike. That's yet another problem with Growatog.
That's actually
really good.
So that like the game ends in a different time than it should end as a result of the presence of Mox Diamond, right? And so,
but only, and this is the key, only if you build your deck in such a way that you can collapse the game. So in a deck like Ponza, it collapses the game by trapping the opponent on turn 2. The opponent never breaks out of turn 2, and that Mox Diamond helps you leap ahead. So your opponent just dies with a Yavimaya Elder in hand, or whatever people do on turn 3s these days.
It doesn't matter how much card advantage they have at that point because they can't play.
Yeah, right? I mean, this is all very easily like just. It was funny because we played a cube draft with Dan OMS's Cube, and he had a conspiracy card that was like the one where you just get to be on the play every game. And Mox Diamond in your opening hand is that card. Oh. And if your deck functions tremendously better on the play, and it has cards that really care about you being on the play, you can be on the play. And if you are already on the play, you could be on the super play. And the question just becomes, well, is your deck good at being on the play with 6 cards, or you know, right? Which is one thing, right? So if you're on the play and you have Mox, you gas out with your 6 cards, and you stop tapping your Mox to do things, then you've effectively not done anything with your Mox.
Lanny's bragging about us getting to play Cube at John Finkel's house, right?
But let me finish. You know, the what you said, which is just like, can you build your entire deck around Mox? Can you build your entire deck around being having the advantage of being on the play? And with a deck that contains a bunch of Stone Range and Spheres of Resistance, that's very clear. And then also, if you're playing a deck with a lot of Days, which is a card that becomes substantially better on the play than it is on the draw. You also get to capitalize on that, and sort of old Grotog setups abuse that. They also abused its interaction with Winter Orb and Armageddon, of course, of course being necessary for fixing. But and then Terrageddon, of course, abuses it for Weather Wayfarer and Armageddon.
And Parfait uses it into Armageddon.
Yeah. I mean, Parfait just uses it. It's like player draw with Parfait. It just didn't matter.
So Lanny, I think that actually gets to part of the problem with Growatog. It's okay to invest your card in Mox Diamond, but you you go heavily into debt. I know we're going to get into more analogies, and you have to win the game before interest on that debt catches up with you. In other words, out of analogy land for you, Michael, you make that initial card investment, but you're down a card, and in order for that loss to be recuperated, you have to do something devastating, because eventually your opponent will outpace you because you've voluntarily,
right, because they are naturally a card ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's mostly about leverage, right? Right, like the Mox Diamond deck, when it's working, is capable of it has to be capable of generating an inordinate amount of leverage relative to the amount of time that the game's going on, or it's going to lose to being down a card, right? Like and I think like what Lanny tries to do, or has historically tried to do, is to like make a really big creature that doesn't require a lot of mana, right?
But so you can just do that with Dreadnought, and this is why I've often said that Gat's just a bad Dreadnought.
Well, okay, I mean, I'm gonna stop. I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation for the sake of having it, and it'll just go down in history as one of the greatest Spike Colony tangents amongst great Spike Colony tangents. But the two things here I'll address in order. One, the concept that making a large creature is the thing that's getting you ahead. I think that's like a very common misconception about the Quirion Dryad deck, which is, the concept that, Quirion Dryad is, is the deck or is the 2-mana creature. I think the important part, of course, that it's 2 mana, but the less important part is the timing around when it arrives. Because if you're not playing, if Quirion Dryad is not the non-cantrip card in your hand, the other card in your hand, is effectively going to keep the game in its current state for the most part. It depends on your opponent, but if it's not a Quirion Dryad, then it's just a counterspell, right? Or it's just a Quirion Dryad like.
Yeah, but you need to shorten the game. Like I'll just
no, you don't. No, you don't. You don't need to literally, like, I don't like the concept here, introducing the concept here of shortening the game, because one of the things that most Grotog players will experience is that they will be in a long game against an opponent that doesn't draw cards, and their opponent is more likely to flood out, because even if you lump in your 17 land deck with 4 Mox Diamond as a 21 mana source decks, most opposing decks are 24 or 26 mana source decks, and as a result, your draw step is still going to be more dense than your opponent. And if you play a long game, I've played tons of long games. The majority of my games are long with the Grotog deck, and they've only gotten longer as time has progressed. But even in the olden days where you were still like a day's whatever deck, like you would still play 20 turns with some control deck and just win because they wouldn't draw out. And I think it's a very like common misconception that Grotog needs to be the beatdown in so many situations, in much the same way that the Dreadnought deck, the mono blue Dreadnought deck specifically, has always been thought to be the beatdown. Now, the second thing I want to add, which was the why not play Dreadnought question that you brought up, which I think is actually super fun to address, because I tried to play a deck that contained both Dreadnought and Mox Diamond, and I realized that I couldn't have that many sources of card disadvantage in my deck, because at the end of the day, Dreadnought is a two card investment for the Dreadnought player, and that is actually the gigantic Achilles heel of the Dreadnought deck, which is just that it costs 2 mana to invest in this giant guy, and if you drawing your stuff out of order means every other card in your deck needs to be quite flexible, because for every turn that your hand is Vision Charm, any amount of land, like whatever, and your opponent is like card that does something, you're just playing shorthanded. You actually live in the same world of debt that you just described with Mox Diamond. You live with a 6-card hand until you find the Dreadnought, and then all of a sudden you have like, a 10-card hand, because a 12/12 is naturally card advantageous in many situations. And then, of course, your extra copies of Vision Charm become counterspells. But until that point, you only have 3 cards in hand. And both Grotog and Dreadnought take advantage of the card counterspell in the same way, which is that your opponent's deck mostly also lives in a same weird paradigm where they have cards that interact and rely on each other. And as a result, if you just counter the spell that, their deck hinges upon, you get to take advantage of your deck being much better at finding cards via Xerox, having fewer lands, et cetera, et cetera. And then that kind of parlays into the final point, which is just that the less linear your opponent's deck is, it tends to be better against Grotog and Dreadnought, because if your opponent is playing like Survival of the Fittest and a bunch of 1/1s, you just counter Survival of the Fittest, right? And 1/1s can't end the game. But if your opponent's deck is just 2/2s and Call the Herd or whatever, Counterspell can't unwind the paradigm of you having far fewer cards in your hand than your opponent. Like, Counterspell is only good at unwinding if your opponent is cycling through Attunement, casting Frantic Search, Intuition, and then you counter Replenish, and then once again you're even on parity. So like, this concept is like very, very central to just the nature of decks that are inherently card disadvantageous, like inherently have stuff like Mox Diamond, stuff like Dreadnought, and to a certain extent 26 lands and attunements that they have to then make up for their disadvantage in various ways, which finally, actually, I'm glad this segues back into our point, which is why adding Mana Leak to Replenish was an extremely important way to give Replenish a form of interaction that once like I said again, if you're playing Replenish and your hand is all Parallax Tide and no Seal of Cleansing and no like whatever, those Parallax Tides are just kind of bad time walks. But if you're sitting there and you're waiting to draw your Replenish piece, and your opponent is sitting there and they're waiting to draw their cool thing that they're doing, and they finally draw it and you Mana Leak it, and they have to wait for the next copy, you've once again put your opponent in exactly the same spot.
I really like how you've gone from Xerox to the anti-Xerox, but using counters as the bridge between them. That was very good. That was very good. The point I want to address for Grow versus Dreadnought is that eventually you draw the Dreadnought using your cantrips, you do unlock those Vision Charms, whereas with Grow, you never recoup that. You don't recoup the land that you discard until you cast Armageddon.
Or until you cast Armageddon, or in sort of a parallel world, like in a oblique way, when you have a gush. But the bigger point is just that you, like with Grotog stealing the play, like you steal the play, you get to be like a slightly more dense deck than your opponent, and then you're just naturally card advantageous via stuff like Meddling Mage and like we said, low land count, getting to be Xerox. Those are all natural forms of card advantage, and Mox Diamond is basically this bad fixing card that makes it possible for you to be be a mono blue deck that has four splash colors, which I think begs a very interesting question, which is, if you didn't play Mox Diamond in Grotog, could you be a blue-based Xerox aggro control deck that didn't play Gush, but still got to play, some sort of days game and whatever? And I've been exploring that with cards like Chromatic Sphere.
Play a Psychotog deck.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that Psychotog is like quite bad in that context because it costs 3 mana.
What about the Esper Dreadnought list that you were making me read about last week?
I mean, that's
5 minutes. I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's something else. I mean, that's adding Enlightened Tutor to your deck, which is another card disadvantage spell to find a card disadvantage spell in the form of Phyrexian Dreadnought. I guess we'll let this segue.
Can you create other types of leverage though, right?
So, well, yeah, your leverage is just duress.
That doesn't seem like very much leverage.
Well, duress
that's just a 1-for-1 where you're behind on mana.
Right, but duress is functioning as like the So problem number 1 is that effectively, so there's 2 differences between.
I guess you beat me by duressing my Naturalize the other night.
I mean, if I didn't have the duress, I would have Meddling Mage the Naturalize, which is actually kind of the interesting aspect. So But let's just rewind. So thing number one, which is the concept of a blue-white or mono-blue or blue, like a classic Dreadnought deck. A lot of people have commented, like I've seen the comment before, it's just like, so if your first Dreadnought dies, do you lose the game? And
sometimes it depends how long the game goes.
Do you lose the game because your Dreadnought died? And
Often.
the answer to the question is actually pretty straightforward. It's like, well, if your first Dreadnought dies, all that happened for the most part is you probably just got 2 for 1, right? And so if
it depends, right? Like if we take all the things that Dr. Surf and Surf talked about last week, right? And just like cast all your cantrips before you try to go up, all these sorts of things. Oftentimes you will lose because you put too much energy into it and now you don't have anything. That happens.
Well, you generally speaking match. If we're just talking about dreadnoughts and anti-dreadnoughts, for the most part, your opponent is trading 1 card with your 1 card, right? So regardless of the situation, like, you're going to play Dreadnought, and at the end of the day, you're going to throw counter spells and plowshares and like counter spells and removal spells back and forth at each other. And if you lose the Dreadnought, all that happens is your opponent took away your your opponent 2 for 1'd you. Like that's like the thing. And then so what happens when your opponent 2 for 1's you? It's like, okay, well now you're behind and you probably are like don't have a battlefield. So whatever random object your opponent has remaining, they can take it to the house before you find your next Dreadnought and your next Dreadnought enabler. So the Esper Dreadnought deck, which you can read all about on Brian Durkin's primer on Well of Knowledge, in which he has a huge amount of hot takes, but we won't get into each and every one of them.
I read that. I thought it was a funny joke.
If you live in...
You thought it was funny?
Sure. I thought the whole thing was a joke. I mean...
If you live in this world, right? You're playing a deck that contains Duress, Peak, Cabal Therapy, Meddling Mage.
Peak as in Tainted Peak.
No. Yeah, no. Just Peek, Peak.
That's not how it's spelled.
Yeah, exactly. And when you cast your Dreadnought, you are simply saying, I'm not, like, this is the end of the game. Like, we have reached the end point of the game because I've invested all of my Enlightened Tutor, Duress, whatever style stuff. I mean, that deck should probably play Sylvan Safekeeper, for all I know. But, it's basically all in on Dreadnought, right? And so if you're all in on Dreadnought, you're not getting 2 for 1. You're just, you just become, effectively a pure combo deck, which is all of my cards are Duresses or, cantrips and rituals and tendrils of agony, right? It's just like in another, it has much more of the, we talked about this in the Lobstercon, that Dreadnought is the true Reanimator deck, right? But there are blue Reanimator decks, but before it was blue Reanimator decks, in the middle there, it was a black-red Reanimator deck that was playing Unmask. It was playing Chancellor of the Annex, which is like a reveal from hand. I can't even describe this to a pre-modern player. It's just a free 4 spike if it's in your opening hand. And that deck, essentially played a very, very similar type of game, which is I'm going to put my bomb on the battlefield, and if you can deal with that, I'm very likely to lose the game. But my deck is very, very good at stopping you from being able to deal with that. So this Esper Dreadnought deck is very heavily invested in sending in the Dreadnought when it knows the coast is absolutely clear, and the only thing that can beat you is the top of your opponent's deck. And I think it's interesting because one thing that it has going for it is like, okay, well, it doesn't have Gosh Gus is very powerful, but it also doesn't have foil. So it doesn't use this card disadvantageous foil to accomplish what it does by having a wide variety of duress style stuff.
I feel like blue-white Dreadnought and mono-blue Dreadnought with their Dazes, Gushes, foils, etc. exploit what's good about Dreadnought, which is that it's inherently card disadvantageous, but it makes the game super short. So it ensures that the game is super short. Right, like if the opponent can play an infinite number of turns, they're going to find an answer to your 1 casting cost 12/12. Yeah, that's actually the strength of the deck.
Well, I'm just saying that those decks plausibly, are going to be less good against opponents that are over leveraged on removal effects. So like Black-White Control is an example of a deck, or actually Replenish is a great example of a deck, because Replenish has, an extreme litany of answers to specifically the card Phyrexian Dreadnought. It doesn't have very many answers to Parallax Tide, but it has a ton of answers to Dreadnought, and it is at least plausible trading 1-for-1 that a like peak duress cabal therapy meddling mage approach would be better against specifically Replenish's removal plan than just trying to have enough days and foil and counterspell in your hand to get something through. Because one of the paradigms here is that your opponent playing Dreadnought gives your opponent mana advantage, because they can, even if they have a hand full of clunky removal, they get the end of your turn, they get all of their turn, then you attack, and then they get their turn again. So their mana is effectively doubled or tripled from the point that you play
Unless you have
Dreadnought.
a Vision Charm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that Vision Charm doesn't trade up against your stuff, but and that it prevents your opponent's ability to sorcery speed stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But you'll still double, right? So if you go Dreadnought Jam, they go Plowshares, you go Vision Charm, they untap. They can still operate on your end step, right? They can still go or on your upkeep rather, which is the most common play pattern, which is then they go disenchant, then you fight again, and then maybe you stick a Vision Charm, then they untap again, then they can draw cards like whatever, and then fight again on your upkeep. The point I'm making is that your opponent gets to double or triple their mana. So you're very lean, your stuff is very efficient, but your opponent gets multiple untaps to deal with this Dreadnought. So at that point, it's no longer important that duress is mana disadvantageous versus foil, because all that matters is if you can have enough duress total to equal the amount of removal that your opponent has. And that's kind of where we get this sort of Esper Dreadnought advantage. And of course, Peak and Cabal Therapy and Meddling Mage give you the opportunity to get multiple cards for one, right? Because Therapy can get 2 plows, and Meddling Mage can stop 2 whatever. I'm not saying that makes this deck good or whatever, but at least it gives this deck a reason to exist.
It's Dump Truck, but with Dreadnought added.
I'm not familiar with the reference, but I will.
Dump Truck is a deck that Ben Rubin used to win a Grand Prix in San Diego in like 2002.
Fair enough. I mean, if you look,
his strategy was to side in 4 Moxes and 4 Chills against red, because his deck was so bad against red.
I mean, that sounds like somebody we know. So it's actually kind of interesting, right? Because Rich, I feel like if I just frame this deck to you better. So just imagine you're the Rock, right? And you're playing your Duress Cabal Therapy game.
Yes.
And you play your Duress Cabal Therapy game, and you've Duress, flashback, Duress, Therapy, flashback, Therapy. Your opponent doesn't have much going on in hand. And instead of tapping 2 to activate your Treetop Village, you play Phyrexian Dreadnought, and then you cast Vision Charm targeting Phyrexian Dreadnought. Surely that's better than what the Rock is going on, right?
Well, okay, yeah. We're better than the Rock. Wonderful.
Kind of. You create a fault point, though. The Rock can't currently be pinpoint removaled. I mean, like that's actually a thing the Rock has going for it. Like, its lack of plan means just like, oh, sure, kill my Yavimaya Elder. Oh, you want to trade a card with my Wall of Blossoms? Go for it, right? Now you're like, well, here's a high value permanent that I invested multiple mana and multiple cards into. Like, I will gladly try to kill that with my point removal spell.
The Rock will never make up for investing 2 cards into one thing. And
Michael J knows it. He lost the game. He missed on his Cabal Therapy on turn 1, and he's like, oh, this doesn't feel good. He mulled to 6 Cabal Therapies, names Impulse against my Island Ponder start, misses, and then his takeaway was, oh, well, I lost because I was a card down, and you drew Impulse the next turn anyway, so I probably should have cast the Cabal Therapy because it was in your top 8 range, not your top 7 range, instead of the conclusion being like, damn, the rock really sucks. Like, I can't possibly recover from missing on a single Cabal therapy.
The seduction of the rock is that, I won the game that I got hit by the third Armageddon, but I felt like I was in all 3 games. I totally get it. Like, the rock players are just like, they're just like heroin addicts. Like, they're just jonesing for their next fix. They feel something, right? But it's like the fact that they always lose just never dawns on them. They're like, how they're like gamblers are just like more addicted to gambling if they lose a little bit more than they have to win some.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But they chase the dopamine more if they lose more. That's every rock player, I think. Yeah. Right? Like, I mean, I felt it. I'm like, I was in all 3. I could have won that game.
Yeah.
If I
just pull the freaking slot machine one more time.
I was thinking back, and I was just like, man, if I just duress the stifle, right? I was just like, I don't think Lanny could beat me except with the dreadnought. Why did I take the gush? I was like, man, like, and I'm just like thinking, this is like, who cares if I take the stifle or the gush? Both cards are better than any card in my deck, right? I had the choice. I chose the one that was a 2-for-1 instead of the one that was a 1-for-2.
That's the huge loss when you play this black, white, blue, the rock-ish dump truck-esque dreadnought deck. You lose Gush. It's Gush. Gush, when I first started paying attention to pre-modern, I looked at the cards available in the format, and I quickly decided that Gush is by far the best card in the format, and I just need to build around it, and I think the best way to exploit Gush is Dreadnought, and that's why the first deck I built in this format was a blue-black Dreadnought deck. And I think it's not a small thing to take away Gush from the deck, and certainly calling the deck, you're building the Dreadnought deck wrong, you should be building it without your gushes, which is what the title of this article does, is part of why I find it so funny. It's not, here's an interesting approach to Dreadnought. It's, what you're doing is bad, you and your gush. Those are terrible. Here's a City of Brass gemstone mine contraption that will wheel out so you can eventually play your Dreadnought and you'll never get your cards back that you invested in. City of
Brass is so bad and people shouldn't play more than 1 copy except in combo decks.
What's that?
I think City of Brass is so bad, and like people shouldn't play more than 1 copy except in combo decks. Like, it's just literally begging to.
This is a combo deck, though. Like this literally is a combo deck.
How? I can't tell if it's a mid-range deck or a combo deck.
Okay, we don't have to spend any more time on blue, white, black Dreadnought. As I mentioned in my rebuttal to the article, clickbait and hot takes are table stakes in the content game, and I do not begrudge Brian Durkin for whipping out his most incendiary takes for the purpose of the article. It's there. If you want to give the deck a spin, you certainly can.
Please do. I hope you're playing against me.
Yeah, I think.
I said, I thought it was a joke or like a parody of how people just puff up ridiculous ideas in the format.
It is plausibly still an entirely satirical article, but
which is what I assumed when I read it.
We have no way of confirming or denying.
We don't. It could be a very funny joke, or a sad joke.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm
going to get wrecked by this. I'm just going to get like obliterated the next time.
Yeah. You're just building up the karma.
Dreadnought dump truck, and it's going to just squish me.
Well, that's the point, right? It's like this deck can conceivably have an opening hand that's just Duress Cabal Therapy Dreadnought combo. Doesn't that just beat almost everything?
It does. I agree. I mean, so does the second place Lobstercon deck. But yes, if you the second place Lobstercon deck has to have Duress. Like, that's the point. Like, it just doesn't have the second Lobstercon deck needs to go. It could never, like, the second place Lobstercon deck has to go turn 1 Swamp Duress, turn 2 Island Duress, turn 3 it needs another island to cast a gush, and then it's like, whatever, when you could just be duressing for a 3rd time, or Cabal Therapy, or Peak, or Meddling Mage. Anyways, these all sound much better, but yeah,
I can't believe we're spending 30 minutes on this deck.
Just play the Days Impulse game.
That sounds so much better, Mike.
And there's Curse Scrolls, which Which
This is why I just think it's a giant joke. You're putting Curse Scroll in your deck where you're going to sit there with a Stifle and a Vision Charm in your hand, and you're
well, no,
also
you
gonna have
see,
Curse Scroll.
you just cast the Vision Charm to mill for 4, so you can turn on your Curse Scroll. But the bigger thing is like you don't have Gush.
City of Brass is so bad to me.
So this is why I think
so
this is a joke. I could be wrong, but I'm assuming this article is a humor piece.
Also,
It's actually really funny because when I was getting ready for this podcast, I was like, this is actually going to be like sweet. I'm pretty excited. Rich is just like a great guy, really positive force in the community, and we've like basically gotten you to like unleash like you shitting on various decks for the last hour and 40. Like I had no idea how much mudslinging would be happening in the Rich Shay interview. Like I'd expect that.
We've gone on a tour of various mid-range and mid-range-esque.
I honestly want to hear about more decks that you hate. Like, should we talk about Landstill? Like, should we even be talking about Replenish at this point?
Landstill's great.
Is Tropical Enchantress good? I have that built. That's one of the decks I have built.
All right. So let me talk a little bit about Tropical Enchantress. And I don't mean to discard everything. I don't like mid-range. I would not begrudge someone for playing mid-range. I don't even think they're bad. They're just so inconsistent with how I like to build Magic the Gathering decks. But yeah, of course I'm gonna. You know my feelings about GAT. And
I get where you're coming from.
Lanny has.
From a long time, I was just like, I can understand where you're coming from. And then, especially when Lanny beat you with GAT, you had pointed out, like, the cards he beat you with were literally just cards he could have drawn in Dreadnought. Like, he didn't actually beat you with any unique elements to GAT. But, over time, I really softened my position on GAT because it has a good spread of matchups. That's one thing. And the thing that I think that you might underrate about GAT, we did an episode, I think, called Superman versus Shazam, is that Dreadnought decks are very targetable in a way that GAT decks are not. Because GAT's like GAT is like the Rock version of Dreadnought, right? Like you're just like,
yes, I agree.
If you take the Rock, you take Dreadnought, you're like, well, what if this were actually the Rock? Right? We're like, we have all the same stuff, but we're gonna make it the Rock, right?
Yes.
It makes it very hard to shoot at. But Dreadnought is so powerful, but so easy to shoot at.
Well, that's why I like Brain Freeze. That's why I think I invented Brain Freeze in the Dreadnought sideboard, and all of my Dreadnought builds just you have Brain Freeze, which dodges all of the dedicated Dreadnought per se hate.
Well, I remember a conversation you and I had. I don't know if you remember it last year, where I was saying I don't like Impulse in Dreadnought, and you said, "Well, I get it, but if you have Brain Freeze in your sideboard, you kind of have to play Impulse, and if you don't have Brain Freeze in your sideboard, get a new sideboard." That's so. So then I was like, "Oh, okay, that's an argument for Impulse." But then what I did instead was just not play Brain Freeze, instead play Armageddon.
Well, fair. I mean,
and then I was like, that's license for me not to play Impulse.
Armageddon does a lot of what I want Brain Freeze to do. It plays around the specific Dreadnought hate, and maybe the tide gets you there well enough anyway. Because
I like Impulse in Dr. Surf and Surf's deck. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I don't think about Dreadnought or Mono Blue Dreadnought in particular as a deck that's about accumulating resources, right? I think about it as a deck that's about manipulating resources on both sides of the table.
What if it's both?
But Dr. Surf and Surf in particular is a deck about accumulating resources.
I think the fact that we talked about being able to play multiple roles. What I really like about Raska's deck is that it can attack you on all these angles, and this is what I really like about it. It can just jam a turn 2 Dreadnought with a foil in a daze, fair enough, but it can also drag you into the deep end of the pool, and I love the 2 flashes of insight. I think that's a great innovation. I really like that.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, once you're in the market for flash of insight, impulse seems just economical by comparison. So it's really hard to make that anti-impulse argument once you're in the
And
flash of insight.
if you're shifting into another A plus B combo post board, then impulse is great.
Oh, and especially when it's so much mana, flash is great, and impulse is great because you're accumulating resources.
Exactly. So I love what he's done with the deck. I would still play Brain Freeze, but I really like what he's done with it.
I'm just going to chime in to say that I think the Shrimp Crew at least credits Sven Lutz with being the first person to put Brain Freeze into the Dreadnought sideboard. But a quick search on TC Decks, I'm sure, will reveal the true progenitor of said
we would never do that. Also, we're a $1 turning a screw, $9,999 knowing which screw to turn podcast.
I thought we were the Analogies Are Bad podcast.
Yeah, that's a secret. That's a secret. Also, analogies aren't bad. I just don't like them. So Will
Hurst actually has the one of Brain Freeze in the sideboard of Mono Blue Stifle Knot at the October 2022 Midwest Pre-Modern Championship.
I was thinking about this specifically before we.
I wonder if he got that from me. I don't remember the exact timeline.
Fair enough. Will Hurst. The truth is, all of Will Hurst's success in Magic thus far has been a result of having Rich Shay in his ear, telling him exactly what he needs to do.
Rich is just playing multiple poker tables at once.
Yeah. He's just playing multiple hands at the table.
And Will is just like his Muppet, right? That's your.
Will is great. Will is so dedicated to the community, to making content. He's really, really passionate about that, and I think that's so admirable.
And then sometimes he publishes articles about Blue, White, Black Dreadnought, and then
here's
all help.
Like on the one hand, I might be dismantling the article. On the other hand, it's not like I'm publishing an article about how I build Dreadnought. So I have to give credit.
Well, you certainly could.
I want to talk about analogies. Here's my thought. Every analogy is intellectually lazy. That's what I don't like about them. Every single one is intellectually lazy. You use a stand-in instead of trying to explain the actual point. However, that's a semicolon. So I'm anti-analogies in the abstract, but I'm pro-analogies because I'm pro making people understand things that are complicated to understand otherwise. And analogies are actually often pretty good at accomplishing that task.
Let me push back on that a little bit. I basically always think in analogies, and I think a lot of people do. And if you just look at the way our language is structured, we just slip in analogies without even realizing it. I think that like when I talk about what I want from a deck, the only vocabulary that I have is to talk about a narrative structure and about a fixed point on a horizon. Those are analogies. There's no literal narrative structure that's going on here, but I need to be able to convey my point, and I don't have an explicit way of conveying this point.
So I read a book by Michael Lewis a few years ago, which is about the relationship between Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is well known for
behavioral economics. They both are, right?
Yeah, Thinking Fast and Slow. So Kahneman got a lot of credit for this after Tversky's death, but Lewis makes the argument that Tversky was really the great genius of their relationship, and Tversky is just the greatest psychologist to ever live, or something like whatever. It just really, really strong, a strong level of genius, and that he was just this polymath who knew all kinds of different stuff. So I adopted this notion about analogies being intellectually non-rigorous after reading this Michael Lewis book, because that's how Tversky felt. And I used to be like, Lanny's just like, Mike is this person who hates analogies, who always uses analogies. But I mostly used analogies before I read this Michael Lewis book, and then I stopped liking them as a result of having read this book. But like, I'll give you another thought, which is just like, I think like Tony Robbins is like an incredible communicator, an incredible teacher of difficult concepts. And he's like addicted to analogies, right? And he uses them incredibly artfully because he's often communicating things that are so difficult for the average person to comprehend, but they can comprehend the analogy. And so he thinks all learning is just a result. Good learning is a result of making people understand things that they didn't already know, right? And Analogies can help you in that direction.
How do you explain the gear concept without analogy?
Oh, well, I'm not going to explain it at all. I'm not pro analogy. So, that would
mean you're
totally, what?
Does that mean you're anti-gears?
Well, no one has ever confronted me with this before. I'm now dividing by zero in a way that's causing my computer to not work.
Short-circuiting. Yeah, I like Rich's...
I might be pro-analogy again.
I like Rich's point, which is that analogies, making them an argument is one thing, but truly what's happening is that in order for you to understand a concept yourself or have any knowledge to begin with, is by drawing connections, which effectively end in analogy, because you cannot comprehend a new thing unless you make it compatible with your existing framework for your ability to learn and your knowledge base.
That's like a lot of what Robbins would say. And the thing that is very striking to me, and in fact, I would say humiliating in this case, is I wrote Finding the Three Gears after I read the Michael Lewis book about Tversky and Kahneman, which is really, this is shattering my concept of the things that I believe. So I think I might be back to pro-analogy. So congratulations, Rich. I think you might have made this a pro-analogy podcast.
We are now a pro-analogy podcast.
We're now a
pro-analogies. But Kahneman and Tversky did absolutely brilliant work, and they did really good experimental work. And part of what I liked about behavioral economics in particular is that it introduces human subject experimentation into the world of economics to understand preference very specifically. So I hadn't heard before that either of them were anti-analogy, but it makes sense when you say that.
Tversky is I can't remember which one of them is I think Tversky is like a super affable guy, and like Kahneman's like a super prickly pear. I can't remember which one is which, but like one of them is just like very is a big Debbie Downer about a lot of things. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was just like, well, all analogies are terrible. Don't ever bring one up.
Analogies are... An analogy is not a good scientific argument. If you were handed a scientific paper that were trying to demonstrate new knowledge, analogies would be terrible. If someone's making an economics argument by analogy, there's probably something deeply flawed with it. But in the world of Magic the Gathering, a Richard Garfield game, we don't have enough data to do the sort of statistical analyses that you would extract from a human subject study. We don't have enough sample size to be able to say that, well, 17 land is too many, you want to go with 16.
Right.
And instead, we have to try to go with reasoning more akin to rhetoric.
Or vibes. They're called vibes, Rich.
I'm far too mature for that sort of language. But I would say that we are not able to do what Kahneman and Tversky did. We don't have the data. And when you are outside of a framework where you have sufficient data, you're reduced to thinking in analogy because that's kind of all you have. But that doesn't mean it's a bad tool. I think
it is not a bad tool. We are a pro-analogy podcast.
I'm glad that we got to this point because I wanted to as we have two men of science in this podcast here and one man of passions and emotion. I'll leave it to the viewers to decide who is who, but Rich, you are clearly a man of science, and you've pointed out that there's basically this flaw in Magic, which is you can't achieve sample sizes. So one example that I like to use is that some people are so committed to Karsten's mana source count table that they just completely lose the plot of the deck's context. They're just like, you have 2 white cards in your deck. You need to have 14 white sources. Your 13 white sources is not enough. Because they say it like if you have 14, you're 100% to have. If you have 14 of all your sources, you're 100% to have one of each in your opening hand. And if you have 13, you'll just not draw any mana. And it just like blows me away that they just can't comprehend. It's just like, well, your likelihood of having that mana source in your hand just goes down, whatever, like 3% or who the hell knows? It just doesn't matter, right? Because it is a vibe. Like you actually have to look at the card that you're trying to cast and read it and be like, how important is it for me to have this in my opening hand and always be able to cast it? Because it also becomes a parlay between the 40% that you have it in your opener and the 90 or 88%, whatever Karsten's threshold is. But when it comes to building and tuning decks and paying attention to your results, paying attention to the decks that you're losing to, paying attention to the decks you're winning, like the sum total of all this is that you come to decisions surrounding whether or not you have 26 lands in your deck, whether or not you play 4 copies of Swords of Plowshares or 1 copy of Swords of Plowshares. All of these things are effectively not really possible for one person just playtesting pre-modern to come to a scientific conclusion as to what's optimal. So I wanted to kind of ask you about methodologies, your methodologies and approaches to sort of updating what you're doing. And then also if you've learned anything, because we haven't talked about Lobstercon really at all, but Lobstercon really, I mean, some might say the wheels fell off. So do you have kind of a reaction to that? And has that also made you rethink some of your methodologies?
That's a really good question. That's actually 3 questions.
Yes.
But let me try to address those because I think they're worth addressing. The first one has to do with structural frameworks. And I think the best analogy that I can give you for the first one is, you ever go to like middle school or high school?
Both.
Okay, cool. So when you were there, they probably taught you how to write a 3-paragraph essay.
Right. Intro.
And it's formulaic.
Yeah.
It's
Conclusion.
structural.
Yeah.
And you probably don't write all that many 3-paragraph essays today, but if you don't get dragged through how to write a 3-paragraph essay, you probably don't. You're probably behind in learning how to write other things. And so the value of a rigorous framework is that it is scaffolding on learning how to do something. So the Karsten tables are great because until you look at them and study them and try to figure out how did he get these numbers, you will struggle to put together decent mana bases. And it's not until you've learned those rules that you can start to break those rules. But you shouldn't discard the scaffolding that's there until you've integrated it enough into yourself that you understand why it was put there in the first place. And this applies to building mana tables and all other societal rules. You basically have to understand them well enough to be able to break them, and you shouldn't try to break them until you understand at least why they were put there in the first place. So so for the mana tables, yes, they're trying to give you a discrete value when really you're operating in a probabilistic space. But that's actually not bad, and if you're not going to put a lot of time into really delving into it, you should just follow his mana tables because they're going to be better than your off-the-cuff sentiment. Then when you really want to delve into it, then you can start to get into hypergeometric distributions. You can actually get to the numbers of, say that you want to have an 85% chance of having 2 white sources on your 4th turn. So then you need, I think, 16 white sources in your deck. But that's sort of the underlying math that's behind a lot of what Karsten's doing. And if you don't want to just use Karsten's tables, then you should get into this math and actually figure this out, because that's really what's underneath there. And that is worth doing.
Yeah. I think I will stop you there and just say that, like, a lot of people who've just played very, very many games of Magic have a sort of intuitive grasp on maybe not so much, double white pips on turn 4, but more so, like, I think I mean, and correct me when I build decks and I start putting the cards, like, I build them. I start with the non-land cards, right? And then as my non-land cards start reaching around like 30 or 34 or whatever, then I start looking at what they are, and then can get an idea of if this is somewhere between an 18 and 28 land deck, based on the cards that I've pulled. And normally I get pretty close to a thing that effectively would make sense by the numbers, but just makes sense because at this point I'm just guided by the cards, right? I have a feel of like, okay, well, my deck contains 4 portent, so where is that going to affect the mana? How many blue sources do I need, and that kind of stuff. So I do agree with you that it's good to pull out the hypergeometric calculator and know how to use it, but I also think that you can get away with not doing that if if you simply
Landon, are you saying
goldfish.
vibes?
Yeah, I'm saying vibes, but I didn't want to slander. I didn't want to use the V word in front of Rich.
Checking vibes. It's a vibes check.
It is a vibe check. Yeah.
You might be good enough to do that. I am not.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
I feel like
I'm not good enough at whatever this is to be able to put this together without running math over it.
I mean, what do you do with?
Said like one of the things that's totally borne the test of time in Magic the Gathering is like every deck has 24 lands more or less, right? Like that if you just look at the baseline beatdown decks with all 1-drops, 24 lands, like control decks with like a bunch of 4-drops, 24 lands, and then they just vary against 24 lands. Like it's weird that you have these formats where people are like, well, actually, we went to 26 lands in our control deck, and it's a big deal when they do that, and they just write a bunch of articles about how they had a 26 land control deck with more lands in the sideboard. Because everybody's always played 24 lands. And when you get lower than 24 lands, it's always pretty unusual. Like, well, this Hatred deck has 23 lands, but it has 3 Cydia Traders, right? Mm-hmm. That's what justifies it.
Some number of Dark Ritual, right?
Yeah. But it's crazy, right? Like this is a deck with like
the card has mana source written right on it.
Right? And it's and it's all 1-drops.
Well,
it's a 1/5 and all 1-drops. Right? And so it's interesting.
Even if you want to use your mostly 1-drop theme deck, you kind of want to you always need your first land drop, and you always need your second land drop too, even if you have a deck full of 1-drops. And you often want your third land drop.
And 24, 24 happens to get you there, and most decks happen to be in that range. But I mean, I wanted to push back because you have this Replenish deck. It's got 26 lands. Maybe you arrived at it mathematically, but how can you possibly account for
talking about it?
Well, no, I'm not saying. I don't think in 2024 we're not just like. We're not just saying all lands.
All right, let's take Karsten's numbers. Karsten will give you 16 land for getting to double white on turn 4 and double blue on turn 4. And when I plug that into a hypergeometric calculator, that turns out to be correct. Yeah. So, yeah, you do want 16 of each color source. Then you can use Karsten's how much mana do you need, and you get to 25 and change.
To hit land drop number 4 and whatever, and then you're just using Ancient Tomb.
He has a calculator, just an algorithm.
it just doesn't even bother. Okay, so
for how many land you need, and it's at least worth looking at. So yeah, I have all of my sideboard configurations for Replenish, and I've run his algorithm on each of those to spit out how many land I need post board in every matchup.
And you just gotta be like, well, it says 25 plus, but then you have Ancient Tomb, so you'll be content in calling it an even 26.
It's right. So it's actually useful, and you can disregard these numbers. And I'm not saying you should follow them, but you should at least know what they are, so that you can have a warning light go off if you're too far afield from them. So that's the value, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I've used a different analogy, which is game theory optimal poker. Now that people can solve poker hands using using GTO, the discussion has been around like, okay, well, people who haven't touched GTO before are like, oh, well, I don't need to use that. I just get reads. I just play with vibes. And it's just like, well, even if you want to play with vibes, it helps for you to know what the solver thinks you should do. And deviating, it just informs the direction of your deviation. I'm a buy on all that. I think maybe I'll turn a new leaf on my deck brewing and start punching in.
I actually want to just talk about the game theory optimal for a second. So I used to be on this team called Cabal Rogue. You probably heard of a lot of players on it. Adrian Sullivan, Brian Kowal, but Jamie Wakefield is one of like the really kind of the famous players on it. And he was famous for making this deck called Secret Force. And in the late 1990s, Jamie couldn't figure out, like Living Death decks were like Secret Force but better in a way, right? Like when we talk about Prime Directive, right? They weren't making a 7-set. Well, actually, they often did make literally Verdant Force, right? But so he was there, and then there was then survival decks came out after just Living Death decks. Living Death was printed earlier than Survival of the Fittest was, and so Jamie's big innovation, kind of in the late summer, I think of like 1998, was to play the card Repopulate, right? So Repopulate is 1 and a G instant, shuffle a player's graveyard into their library.
It's cycling.
Instant speed, and also cycling, right? So you can cycle away your Repopulate. It's never quote unquote dead. So he's just like, well, this is how you get the Living Death guys. You repopulate them in response to Living Death, and it catches them. And I was always making the argument. I'm like, well, Jamie, two things. One, they can just get all their 2-for-1s with survival, right? Like they never even have to cast Living Death, right? Like they can just get their 2-for-1s and they just like chip shot you away, right? With every Bone Shredder that they want. And then separately, right? Like this will be hard to believe, but well, I guess Duress hadn't been printed yet at this point, so it's not that hard to believe that Survival or
Duress is printed in Saga and Repopulate is printed in
Legacy, right?
Legacy.
In Legacy. Okay, so I guess Duress had been printed yet. So but it wasn't widely played in standard black-green decks at that point. That actually shockingly came a bit later, right? So but like Jamie wasn't having any of it that you wouldn't just catch them. And I was just like, I don't get, like, in his universe, he always catches them with Repopulate, right? And in my universe, they're allowed to play differently. He's like, well, they don't know I have Repopulate. But like, okay, even if they don't know you have Repopulate, they don't have to play into your Repopulate, right? Like, they don't have to get gotcha'd, right? Like, that's not a requirement, right? And so I think, like, one of the things that Lanny brings up is that we have this concept of like, what if both players at the table are playing correctly? Then who is supposed to win? Because I think a lot of strategy comes from, I think especially like Flores branded strategy is like, we have an edge in information. Our edge in information allows us to make decisions that will cause our opponents to fumble. That's like a big sort of part of my model. But like if everybody's equally informed, it has maximum amount of information, we're in a completely different universe.
And the rock becomes an unplayable deck. Like all of the rock wins are just about reaching a point where your opponent has made enough mistakes that they threw away the game and you can get across the finish line.
That's not true. It wins 44.5% of the time.
But the rest of the time, if your opponent has any idea about how to manage their resources, they'll generally stay on top of the rock, which has no real card advantage.
It's funny because I sided out Deranged Hermit and Recurring Nightmare, I think, every matchup, which is like one of the few ways that deck could actually get an explosive advantage.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I can't have these cards. I actually just need to be able to answer a fucking Dreadnought.
So, I mean, I think that the important point about the mana tables, etc., and the optimal everything is that it's not bad to ignore them. It's just worth looking at them before you
certainly don't benefit from ignore, like, it doesn't hurt you to not ignore them, exactly. Which I totally understand. I think we should second part of the question was about methodology, or however you wanted to address that.
Okay, yeah, so methodology, building a sideboard mapping is not something that I will generally build a sideboard mapping before an event and then not look at it during the event. But it helps you build a correct 75. I think that it always is changed it is reconfigured, it is restructured in your head. But it means that you don't have 10 cards against Sly and you can only pull 4 out of your deck. And that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. You want your numbers roughly to line up in an okay way. And you also want to make sure that you're not like building your deck to accommodate having 1 white mana on turn 4, but you're bringing in 4 Wrath of God. So now you've brought your deck to an untenable point.
I think that's kind of a trap. I've been thinking
think
about
so?
that. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, just even recently.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a trap. I think that it's very similar to playing the rock, actually. The thing that you described. Where like having these numbers match up. Like I want to take out this amount and put in this amount, right? And the thing is, like, that gives you a sense of agency, and having a sense of agency makes people, human beings, I believe, right? Makes people feel like the universe makes sense, right? Like, oh, I take out 4, I bring in 4, right? Like, and I'm mapping it in this way.
Yes.
But what you really want is to have a clear understanding of how all your matchups line up, and to devote enough space for your bad matchups, and like maybe ignore your really bad matchups, like something like that. And then like maybe you don't put a lot of space in for your good matchups, even if you have suboptimal or dead cards. And that like this whole concept is like, okay, I'm taking out this many because that's how many bad cards I have, right? So I'm going to have the matching number of cards to bring in. It's like a bad paradigm, right? Like you actually need to be in a situation where if your matchup is bad enough that you have a transformational sideboard, right? Like, okay. And that might ask for way more than what a comfortable amount of sideboard mapping will have, or you ignore it, right? What I always say, and I like, Raska like disagreed with this on a fundamental basis when he was doing our podcast last week, but like I think maybe he just I don't know, like I get a bad rap for this. Like maybe he just hasn't played against good enough red players, right? Like that thing is so like red is kind of a poor combo beatdown deck into Dreadnought, right? Mm-hmm. But it can be very effective at becoming a counter sliver deck. Right, yeah. where I have a small amount of advantage, but I keep you enough off your game, that the game can be favorable to me. But I can't either play for the certainty of winning in any particular way, or like to retain my core strategy. Like neither of those things is good. My core strategy is fundamentally bad against your core strategy, right? Like running a Jackal Pup into a 12/12 is a good way to take 12 damage.
Yes.
Right. So like that can't be where my head is at. And I also can't like trick myself into I'm going to play this 1-for-1 game with you because you have Gush and Impulse and Sleight of Hand and Portent and I have the top of my deck, right? Like
you got Urza's Bobble.
Right? Like but what I can do, right, is I can always create an initiative advantage, right? Because the Dreadnought deck requires 2 mana and multiple cards in order to get on the table in most games, right? Like, so I can always have an initiative advantage, and if I play a certain way, I can retain the initiative for long enough to win the game. But I can't really ask for more than that, right? And so everything that I have to do beyond that is to make the game a length of time that is favorable for me and not for you.
So you need Jackal Pup.
So yeah, but you have to think about it differently, right? Like you're contextually the beatdown, but you're not like fundamentally the beatdown anymore, right? So but like that really is like I'm dumping a lot of cards in here, right? I'm playing cards like Mog Salvage in some meta games, right? Like it clearly has no context anywhere else, right? But it is fantastic against someone who, rather than playing Enlightened Tutor and Duress in the same deck, is actually like think about one of the advantages that Dreadnought has on the play is I've been in this situation where I literally have 4 counterplay cards and I lose the Dreadnought War because half the cards they cast were free, right? Like I cast all my cards, like okay, some of mine were free. Like you need to create a leverage point, not just something around resources, and that requires you to reimagine your game plan. I think in a way that people just look at the cards and just like, oh, okay, well. An Overload makes sense because it destroys an artifact. A Blast makes sense because they have blue cards. But what you're really creating here is a paradigm shift from a beatdown deck into a counter sliver deck.
I really like that. You're coming up with a different narrative for the matchup and then needing the cards in your sideboard to affect that narrative.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. You lose game 1 the majority of the time, right? Especially if they go first. So it's never quote unquote good, but it's very winnable, right? And it's winnable if you imagine the universe that you want to be in, and then you embody that universe. But I think that's what you're talking about with narrative, right? Like here's the story that we want to tell together, right? And if I'm dictating the story, then I'm going to be better off. And that's something that
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast before. Like, the purpose of sideboarding is not to just like have some good cards that if you draw it, are going to help you win the game. It's just going to have like a plan that is effective and makes sense in the matchup. So like, there's a reason why Grotog plays Chill instead of Blue Blast, and it's because Grotog can't win using a Blue Blast plan. Like, it can only win using a Chill Armageddon related plan.
Because you need to constrict their mana, right? Like, if they have unfettered mana, they can just kill all your creatures.
Right. And just, it doesn't matter. Like, Blue Blast just gives you 4 more live cards, but you already are just playing, a game where you have, I don't know, maybe Mox Diamond is the card that you need to cut against red for the Blue Blast, because you need to make your deck and your cards matter more. But generally speaking, you're just not going to get there on Blue Blast. I just did a video where I beat Burn. I had Nimble Mongoose in my deck, so I could play Nimble Mongoose Warship, and that became.
Where did you ever get that idea? That sounds like awesome to me.
Nimble Mongoose at the Lobstercon house.
Yeah, we spent a huge portion of the car ride over, and once we arrived and you arrived at the house, we talked a bit about reconceptualizing Grotog around Nimble Mongoose, so I started dabbling around that. But I think this all goes sort of hand in hand, which is that I think you can be in Rich's world and Mike's world at the same time, which is to say, like, okay, well, you sit down and you have this Replenish deck and you start contemplating matchups and how they're going to go and what they're going to be in the meta, and it becomes an interesting dance where you have, and this is actually where the vibes come in, and the science kind of goes out, because it's very difficult, I think, specifically with Replenish pilots, of like what they're doing about goblins and burn. So you have 3 Chill in your sideboard. I've played Chills, I've played Blue Blast, I've played nothing. Like, Mox Diamond was my anti-red tech, and I've played Sphere of Law. And I've had different theories as to why each one made sense. But it ends up being super interesting. Or another thing that I think is really interesting is trying to figure out what Replenish's strategy should be against Meddling Mage counterspell decks. And but this kind of takes in 2 concepts. One, which is just kind of like what makes sense when you sit down to do a sideboard map, which is just like, how many cards like do I need to bring in the matchup, and then 2, like, what does the strategy look like when I bring in those cards? Because a card like Exalted Angel in the sideboard represents your ability to shift strategies, whereas a card like Blue Blast basically is saying, like, well, I'm going to play the same strategy. The only difference I needed was just a mana efficient answer.
Yes, that's very well said. I don't have a satisfactory strategy against red with Replenish. Sly is not a favorable match.
Have you tried intuitioning for 1 solitary confinement and then discarding Squee to it?
I think that would be perfectly good against Sly, not so good against goblins.
No, it doesn't work against goblins at all.
And that's the issue.
You have 100% chance of losing because they eventually draw their naturalize, and you don't draw any additional cards.
I've bet on Chill. Chill is actually not great against goblins.
Agree.
Have you tried intuitioning for solitary confinement and Squee?
I have not, because again, I don't think that'll be good against goblins.
It's not. I just was asking if you had tried.
So no, I
wait. Hold on. Hear me out. You intuition for solitary confinement and Sterling Grove, and another Sterling Grove,
and now we're just Enchantress.
Yeah.
But what if they brought in Tranquil Domain and
counterspell,
Karmic Justice?
Yeah.
And a counterspell, but you also need to have Squee.
And Squee.
So you need to really intuition for 5 cards here.
Yeah.
So we play Gifts Ungiven.
Yeah.
You need them to give you the counterspell. And
You have it in your hand. Yeah.
And in this case,
So we
have
factor
to already
fiction, hope
have
that
a
we have
report.
good cards and hope that our opponent
Right.
makes terrible piles.
Rich is in the middle of saying that we cannot defeat goblins and burn at the same time. I'm inclined at this stage to agree, although I
I haven't cracked it yet.
I do think Sphere of Law is at least interesting. And
So I tried it.
yeah.
I tried it, and I tested this with my friend Matt, and the problem is that the problem is price of progress. The card is really good, and it just cracks through Sphere.
Well, so then you need Sphere and Blue Blast.
Well, okay.
It doesn't matter how many non-basic lands you have; they can't damage you through solitary confinement. I'm just
That is a good point.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, at least you plausibly, because one of the other cards that's really good is to play Fair Tides, but obviously Fair Tides are really bad against Red Blast. But
Right,
you know.
and I think that you should be playing Red Blast in your red deck at this point,
Yeah,
and that's true for Goblins and Sly.
yeah. No, that's fair. I think all those points make sense.
I wish I had a good solution. I think I think that Chill is the best thing I've been able to find strictly against Sly without using the solitary confinement technology, of course.
Yeah.
But if you aren't keen on squeeing it up, I think Chill's the best I've been able to find there. But I lost to Gabe Farkas in the finals of the prior month, and it's because Chill's not good there. If those were Blue Blasts, very different.
Yeah.
And so if Goblins is on the upswing, then maybe I do want a couple Blue Blasts instead of Chills.
why is Blue Blast not good? I lost.
No, Blue Blast is good against Goblins. It's fine against Sly. It's just not as good as Chill.
Oh yeah, because in the $1,000 tournament I played Goblins and land came in second. He Blue Blasted my Goblin ringleader, and then I lost.
Sure, I'm not saying it's bad.
Pretty decisive.
But no, I'm saying against a Goblins deck, Blue Blast is much better than Chill. It's just not as good against Sly.
Right. So we were sort of in the middle of methodology. So you're talking about preparing for an event by making a
Right. So
sideboard
I like
map.
to have my 75 at least roughly mapped out. I like to.
That's
be
why
able
you
to-
said earlier, like 3 to 4 of this, 3 to 4 of that, because
Yeah.
you decide on some of the last slots based on what you're thinking about going into the tournament.
Right. And that's why in my brain, a lot of the deck is 3 or 4 of this, 3 or 4 of that. I think but I like to have it crystallized for the event. You obviously need a metagame prediction, right? If I were expecting more Goblins than Sly, then I wouldn't necessarily put Chill in the sideboard. I'd put Blue Blasts in.
This is actually an interesting one. I guess I might be like the hot take. Well, I guess I'll put it another way. So when you prepare for a tournament like Lobstercon, do you think about the winner's metagame in a way that affects your decision making as well?
I think you have to. I think you have to think about, if I'm going to win, I have to get through X.
Yeah. And
I think that's a good way to think about it. You're going to play a log based 2 of the number of decks in the room.
Right.
So a small slice of them.
Right.
But there's some decks that you're probably going to have to fight your way through. Like, you probably wouldn't take a deck to a tournament right now with the goal of winning if you couldn't beat the Dreadnought featuring Parallax Tide.
Absolutely agree. And that kind of puts you in kind of a weird spot where maybe you go into a room and your expectation is like, okay, Burn is not well positioned in this room because either there's going to be a lot of sideboard cards for Burn, or there's going to be a lot of Burn's naturally difficult matchups.
Right.
But it's still going to be 12% of the room, and maybe you expect to start. In fact, you have no option but to start 2-0, because if you don't start 2-0, then you're kind of already off the boat, and there's nothing you can do about it there. But in order for you to start 2-0, you might have to have those chills for the first half of the tournament and then not have them for the second half. There's that, and then there's also the nonsense X factor, which is just like, do I need cards for when I get paired against somebody just who's completely out there with some some brew,
Do I need to answer Nimble Mongoose?
Yeah. Do I need to well, Nimble Mongoose is going to be a part of the winner's metagame in this analogy.
Well, I've lost to it before. I lost to it at the last Duress Crew Open. So it's, sometimes you get mongoosed.
I think all people should be thinking about how to answer Nimble Mongoose, but the answer is they can't because
no one can answer it.
Because what are you going to do? Have Diabolic Edict in your rock deck?
Wrath of God.
What if you just block it with the Wall of Blossoms?
What if I have 2 Nimble Mongoose?
I mean, you said the Swords of Pleasure is Wall of Blossoms, and then I played another one. You probably felt pretty bad about that.
I mean, the Plowshares was as good as the Bolt, but
just get a Dwarven Demolition team and tap to blow all of them up.
There we go. So what happened at Lobstercon? So what was your preparation like?
I took notes, so I'm going to go to my...
Yeah.
All right. So round one.
Well, before we get into the rounds, just tell me about the build that you brought and what were the important choices you made before the tournament?
Sure. I brought literally my same list from the monthly. I was very happy with it. Again, with a very similar list. I had 2 monthlies. I made it to the final and another one. I was very happy with it. And I didn't see any reason to change it.
All right, fair enough.
I mean, I thought a lot about it, and it's rare for me to be a week before an event thinking, I feel good about this, but I felt good about it.
You didn't have, because if I was in your position, I would probably be I would just be panicking and being like, I need to find what the bad matchup is, right? Because I don't want to be surprised by it beforehand. Because I felt what you felt before, which is just that you're winning a lot. And when you're winning a lot, you don't learn anything because you're just winning. And you're just kind of like, okay, well, I guess I shouldn't do anything different. But there wasn't a nagging sensation that you're just like, what if I don't have a good plan for, just some random deck, just like...
No, I think you have to be at peace that some decks are going to get you.
Fair enough.
Some decks got me. It's not that the wheels fell off. I went a respectable 5-3. That's not a terrible performance, but it didn't go as well as I would have liked, obviously.
Yeah.
But I feel like there are...
Would you do anything different if you could run it again, I guess?
Yes. Yes. I think I would put a Wrath of God in the 75, which Marine Biomancer has been advocating for, and I maybe should have paid attention when I lost to those mongoose. And I would add more webs to the deck.
Fair enough. All right, let's jump into the rounds.
All right. So I took notes because I have zero chance of remembering this otherwise. Round 1, I played against BK. He doesn't cast a single spell until I get him with Tide. That was easy. Game 2, he gets ahead and tides me, and he's beating me up with a Treetop Village. But I use my discard step to build up my graveyard, and eventually he can't stop me from casting a Replenish. Which is, another great argument for the problem with Treetop Village.
BK tells us he made some form of mistake. I don't know what it was, but...
He made a play that might not have been optimal.
Was it registering Treetop Village?
Well, he did the Tide trick where you have Tide and Seal, which, in case you don't know, Michael, allows you to exile your opponent's land permanently. But I had my own...
Wait, but don't they have an opportunity to respond?
Yes, actually, yes. And I did. I responded by having my own Tide in play, so I just shifted out my lands in response, saving them.
Oh, wow.
So, yes, you actually do get to respond if you have your own Tide out.
Fair enough. All right, round 2.
Round 2, I played against Kenneth on 5-color aggro. His deck has Birds of Paradise. He leaks my Replenish, which I didn't see coming. But I seal his Winter Orb and find another Replenish. Game 2, I swords his Elf, seal his Orb, and then he doesn't put any pressure on me, and I win. So I'm not quite sure what his deck was trying to do, but it didn't.
Yeah. I mean, a pure beatdown deck is generally going to struggle with the Replenish, although it has a ghost of a chance if it can have enough pressure and enough disruption, but you kind of have to have the right mix. I didn't see the
mana leak coming.
Yeah. Got you with that one.
Yes, but it wasn't enough because of the lack of pressure.
Yeah.
Round 3, I lost to Galen on Feb. So game 1, he's on the play. I swords his birds, but he has survival. He very, very cleverly gets my frantic search with his therapy, and that was brilliant. I think that if he had named any other card, I would have won, but I was going to be able to use the frantic search to dark ritual my way into a replenish and win, so he halted that line. Game 2, he mulls to 5, but I eventually find swords for his meddling mage. I can't find his swords to stop his meddling mage. And I die with Replenish in hand after getting beaten down by several turns. Right. So that was just... I have 4 swords in my deck after sideboarding. I can't find one. Meddling Mage and some Mesmeric Fiend go coast to coast.
Not bad. Round 4. Sometimes you get...
Is a card.
And it is tough when you're put in that spot. I mean, I assume you don't board in Fact or Fiction for that matchup?
No, I wouldn't for that matchup because you are often dead before you can cast Fact
exactly.
Fiction.
And that becomes kind of the tricky part because I think a lot of Replenish pilots have been in that spot where they need the dig, but some of the dig is just not available.
Yeah, that is the issue. So then round 4, I play against Jay on Mono Red Ponza.
At the 3-0, at 2-1.
2-1, yeah.
I thought at the 3-0 table?
No.
Mike woke up.
That was a weird match. Game
it would have had to have been.
He leads on Vice, which just kills me. He has Port, Double Wasteland, and Pillage, and his draws just line up perfectly against what I'm doing. Game 2, he has a quick Darwin and 3 lightning bolts and an encampment and double Pyroblast to stop me from functioning.
Does he pay Echo on the Darwin?
I believe he does.
Wow.
Get in there.
I am basically... his draws are very well aligned against me. And I need to have more webs in the board, I think.
Yeah. Get those ports locked down. I mean, yes. Some people have played, 2 main, 2 sides. So
I don't even dislike that. I think in the right metagame, that's actually great. So far I've lost to Meddling Mage and things solved by web.
So you've lost primarily to invitational cards. So
yes,
back in 2022, you lost also to Sylvan Safekeeper. Have you ever lost to Shadow Mage?
I don't believe I have. Nor have I lost to...
Watch out. Watch out.
I would remember if I've ever lost to having my deck slowly, badly Jester's capped.
There you go.
I think the next time you play against Shadow Mage Infiltrator, you should look over your shoulder. Because I think there's going to be problems here.
I should. I know Carl Winter's done some awesome stuff with that card.
Now that we bring it up, I'm excited to try it. Maybe in my Duress Cabal Therapy Peak Meddling Mage deck. For
well, I think now we're just full on dump truck again.
So now you know how I always say all victory, the road to victory leads through Lanny, and then I lost to you, so I didn't win the meetup this week. I think if you know that you're going to be playing against Rich, you have to position a Shadow Mage Infiltrator deck. We've uncovered Rich's kryptonite, which is invitational wizards.
Yeah, in fact, 2 years ago, my only loss in Lobstercon in the Swiss was to Ale. So yes,
you don't want to try to get him with a Void Mage Prodigy, Mike.
I mean, one thing you could do is have Rootwater Thief, Void Mage Prodigy, and Shadow Mage Infiltrator all in your deck.
I think
you'd probably be 300% matchup.
Each one
win.
You would get 9 points for beating him.
You can put a Patron Wizard in this deck, and now we're just a Wizard theme deck. We're just locking our opponent right out of the game.
I had a serious idea, and now you're making fun of me. Thanks a lot, Rich.
I mean, I'm just saying, Patron Wizard just brings it all together nicely.
So we're 2-2. Top 8 Dreams, unfortunately crushed by Mono Red Ponza.
So I play against Gregon Reanimator, and I replenish him before he can get me with his Careful
I am
Studies.
the reanimator now.
Yes. Game 2, he casts Careful Study, finds Duress, but he gets a Neshoba out, and I just win because Neshoba gives you plenty of leisure time to win the game.
Yeah. He needs to get the East Shade there.
That's a whole different story.
That's the answer.
Then I play against Richard Stebbing on Blue-White Dreadnought, and we have a really good match. He's an old school player from the UK.
Awesome.
And he's one of the guys that flew across the Atlantic for Lobstercon, which I think is great. I love that people do this.
God bless him.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So game 1, he has a mage on swords, and he gets out a Dreadnought. I seal the Dreadnought. He stifles and I leak. He gets another Dreadnought, and he counters my wave. And I get an Opalescence out, but he counters my Tide, and I die to his Dreadnought. Game 2, we play Draw Go for a while. I stifle his fetch land. I abandon him in response to his Dreadnought. He has to think for a second and realize what's just happened. Another turn, he goes for an Armageddon with 2 mana open. I chant him in response. That resolves, and then I leak the Armageddon. And eventually, I just replenish with chant backup. Game 3, he counters my attunement. He gushes, but I have Factor Fiction. I swords his Meddling Mage, and I once again abandon his Dreadnought, and then I chant through a replenish.
Brutal.
So
Dancing Dreadnought is just the best.
It's so good. So, I feel like I don't have a great plan against the red decks, but against a lot of blue decks, Factor Fiction into a parade of abayances and chants has been unbelievably good.
Yeah,
do you know what's even better
sense.
than abancing in response to a Dreadnought?
Abeyance mana short.
Abeyance in response to a Hermit activation is
that would be really good.
the best feeling that anyone has ever had in Primo.
That would be so good. Yeah. I love the bands in this deck. And so Factor Fiction lets you just play this whole other game where you are leaping ahead in cards, but Abeyance lets you just short out parts of what your opponent is trying to do. And the combination of these two elements together gives you an incredibly good plan against a lot of control decks.
And also the Rock. If you ever draw Factor Fiction against the Rock, there.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah.
Not that you needed help, but
it's happened. I've Factor Fiction the Rock. I've Thawing Glacier the Rock.
So I would not build the deck without 2 or 3 Factor Fiction in the 75. Main deck, sideboard, but in the 75, you want 2 or 3 copies of this.
All right, we're 4-2, right? And then round 7.
So we're, I think we're 5-2 now.
Okay, 5-2 after that.
Right. So let's see. I lost to Galen on Feb. I lost to Jay on Ponza. Oh, I missed. Oops, sorry. I missed this. I missed my round 5 loss.
Oh.
Which was to Gary Roth on White Weenie.
Oh, there you go.
Game 1, he mulls to 5 and leads with a Savannah Lion. I have a second turn attunement, but he wastelands my City of Traders, and I collapse after that. Even with the attunement, I can't find land in time to win. Game 2, I swords his Mother of Runes, but he has another Mother, and then he plays Meddling Mage plus Tormod's Crypt, and I just lose before I can assemble enough answers to this. So, game
Wrath
1,
of God would have been great there.
it would have been unbelievably good. Game 1, sometimes you just have an okay-looking hand that it would have been a turn 3 win, but his Wasteland just cuts me out, and I just can't find enough land to function anymore. That happens, but Wrath of God would have been exactly what I needed for game 2. So now after round 7, I'm at 4-3. Round 8 is Mark Taco, a former vintage world champion, on Mono Blue Dreadnought. This is the only match the entire day where I was on the play. he starts cantripping, and I just get off a quick replenish before he can assemble a threat. Game 2, I leak his dreadnought. I throw out a factor fiction. I swords his second dreadnought. I get down an opalescence, and I just resolve 2 more factor fictions over the course of this, which puts me well ahead enough to win. So 5 and 3, 2 losses to Meddling Mage, 1 to Ponza.
Yeah. I mean, Wrath of God. What about Powder Keg?
I don't dislike the idea of Powder Keg. I think everybody is going to be bringing in all of the disenchant effects.
Yeah.
And I'd rather dodge that. And I think exactly 1 copy of Wrath of God, it's unlikely to get met. And if you do Meddling Mage my 1 copy of Wrath, that's fine.
Yeah, you still have your Parallax Waves and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that 1 Wrath in the 75 and more webs, and I haven't quite figured out exactly what this will look like, but overall, I think the deck worked well. I need a better plan against Ponza, which is probably web. Frantic Search was phenomenal. I'm thinking about going from 3 back to 4.
I always liked having 4. Frantic Search is awesome. It's
so
especially good when
already.
people are trying to port you.
Yeah, it's really good there.
You know what's good against port? Sabo's Web. Have you considered Sabo's Web?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I will.
So I just thought I'd throw that out
Thank
there.
you. I will take that under consideration.
Also might be good against the Ponza deck that you lost.
Oh, I say that is some good thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure what this will look like, but 3, maybe 4 web, probably 3 and 1 Wrath. I want to get those in, and Frantic Search just continues to amaze me at what a great Magic card it is.
I mean, it's banned in most other formats. Well, I guess it's only legal in Vintage, but yeah. All right.
Did you ever win a monthly with Tropical Enchantress?
I think so.
Yeah, Frantic Search must really be good.
I love Frantic Search. All right, so you asked about Tropical Enchantress.
Yeah, I almost played it this week. Instead, I played the Rock, so that we know how well that decision went.
Well, all right. So I love Tropical Enchantress. It's a whole lot of fun. I think it's struggling a little bit right now on 2 fronts, Stone Rain and Tide.
And Sphere Resistance also.
You can fight through the Sphere eventually.
It can't be great against the red deck, right? Like your entire game plan is hinging on these Cloud of Fairies, right?
So you can sort of I splash white and I board in your favorite card, Mike, against the red decks, which is actually very effective.
What is my favorite card?
Solitary Confinement.
Oh, so you have Solitary Confinement.
I've added a white
Enchantresses.
splash. Yes.
Oh, that's very effective against the red decks.
See,
I like
really
it.
Good.
But the thing that I made me not want to play Tropical Enchantress is just like I played against Bill Ellis first round, and he was on the Thermokarst deck.
So the Thermokarsts are terrible for you.
Yeah.
You are a deck with 4 wild growth are not enough. You are going to 8 wild growth for this ridiculous deck, and the only thing worse than having your land destroyed is having your land and your enchant land also destroyed.
So are we saying that I should take apart my Tropical Enchantress deck and maybe just make a regular Enchantress deck out of those cards?
That's what I did.
Okay, yeah, so we'll do that. Or Sam's deck I could make.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Sam's deck is awesome. He showed it to me before the event, and I don't know if it's secret tech, but it's awesome.
Yeah, I can make one of those out of the shell of the Tropical Enchantress cards.
And I don't like that. I enjoy Tropical Enchantress, but I think that as long as Thermokarst is seeing a lot of play and Parallax Tide is seeing a lot of play, it's not really where you want to be.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about it. I mean, once you say it out loud, Parallax Tide seems horrendous for Tropical Enchantress, but I hadn't even thought about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really bad, and I wish that weren't the case.
I mean, Parallax Tide really hits a lot of the Enchantress decks, but I think Enchantress is kind of going to be one of those things to like kind of keep seeing the work on. We'll probably talk to Chris at some point on the podcast.
Is Xantid Swarm an expensive card to own?
No,
it's
not at all.
Okay.
I also have surplus New Border copies for now, so.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I don't know if I own that card. Because if I were
It's not worth anything.
I was going to make Chris's deck, for example.
I think like
You have to. Miri's Guile is expensive if you don't already own, though, Mike.
I own that card.
You own 4 copies?
I don't know. I mean, I must. Okay, maybe is it really expensive? Why would I need to
it's
own
like
it?
$30.
Shut the front door. Why?
I don't know.
Chris and I have some disagreements about that card.
Chris has a lot of disagreements with a lot of people about that card. And you know what? Sam plays through Lobstercon, has 4 Sylvan Library, gets back, turns to me and he says, Laney, I think I'm going to add 1 Miri's Guile to my deck.
Well, because he doesn't have enough of the effect.
He doesn't have enough. No. He's going to trim a Sylvan Library for the Miri's Guile.
But he's playing a Sylvan Library combo.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know. And he just like talks through it. Like it's basically just a flip of the conversation. So Chris, our house is the Enchantress house. We have 10 arms, we have Michael Phillips, and we have Sam Black. And
Shay passed through.
And I'm just like, listen, Miri's Guile is not allowed into the house. I don't care what's going on, but you Enchantress players are just gonna have to leave your Miri's Guiles in the car, and then you can pick them up on your way to the venue. But so we're talking, we have the Miri's Guile talk, and basically Chris is just saying, like, listen, it's just good, it helps your mulligans, it's 1 mana. 1 mana is a big deal. You need it to be 1 mana, and you needed to do something. And then, Sam has an easy out. He's like, my deck contains Words of Worship. I just have to have this Miri's Guile. Anyways, both players play the tournament. I think everyone's like X and 2, X and 3, whatever. And then Sam goes like, yeah, I think I'm gonna do 1 Miri's Guile. And then he's like playing around on his Mox field. I look at his Mox field. I think for the updated version, not only has he gone from 0 to 1 Miri's Guile, I think he ends up with 2 Miri's Guile in his updated list. Yeah, 2 Miri's Guile is in the current list on his Mox field. And he just turns to me and he's just like, yeah, it's actually 1 mana. I need a 1 mana enchantment to do something, fill out the curve. And I'm just like, that's what Chris has been trying to tell everyone. I was just like, I personally still don't understand. I was just like, you could just play Enlightened Tutor, like if you want to like lose a card to like
you want to lose a card
to like put something on top, but I think the most humble thing to say, which is just like, okay, well, Chris has had a very methodical approach to tuning to his Enchantress deck.
That is extremely true.
And in the absence of somebody else taking the same approach and trying to, not build around Miri's Guile and have like the other stuff. Because the other thing is, these things don't happen in a vacuum. So Chris, I think, has also gone down on Exploration and Elephant Grass. So like Enchantress has room for cards that cost G and are enchantments, and in many different contexts don't do anything.
Yes, this is true.
And straw card, man.
And yeah, exactly. And so, it's hard to make a case for Miri's Guile being a good Magic card, but it's not as hard to make a case for Miri's Guile being a better Magic card than Exploration or Elephant Grass. And then, of course, you have all the fetch lands. And Sam Black actually has even more fetch lands, and he has Gaia's Blessing. So he does get some carryover advantage from that type of stuff. So, until I get my hands, I've played no green white Enchantress or green white splash Enchantress in my life. So until I do, I can just simply say like I don't see it, but surely you know better than I do.
It is a very strong deck. I think if you imagine what's the difference between Tangarth's Glare and Portent.
I don't know what Tangarth's Glare is. That's the difference.
I've heard of one, yeah.
Okay, then Index and Portent.
Yes,
one
you draw a card.
Disadvantage.
Yes. Yeah. So you can take a garbage card, and once you add the word draw a card to it, it stops being a garbage card.
Yep.
There's a card that's literally Portent without the card draw in Alpha. Natural... I don't know. It has an owl birdman on it. Natural Selection.
Tangarth's Glare is really getting me. Look at the top 3 cards of target opponent's library, then put them back in any order. Interesting. Sounds like what? Nope. That player looks at the top 3 cards of your library, then puts them back in any order.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's I porting you, you porting me. On the art, Tangarth is looking at a telescope at Squee, who's looking back through the other end.
But
Pete
just
Venters.
imagine if that card had the word "draw a card" on it. I think that would be playable.
It would,
I mean,
it would
it would
actually
be more playable.
It would still be good with fetch lands, and it would give you. I guess if you had fetch land, it'd just be another important, but it'd be red. So
I mean,
right. It would go in Sly. Like this would be playable in Sly. If
Chapin
it
taught me
had the word "draw a card."
like before you say a card is good or not good, imagine the context in which you would ever want this effect, right? It's like sometimes you're like, okay, like there's a lot of cards that aren't good, right? But we can imagine contexts where you'd want the effect, and as a result, those cards end up being quite good, right? So Parallax Tide is a great example, right?
Right.
Like, if you just like read this card, it's just like, huh? Like I make the card, like they come back, it costs 4. Okay, this is really interactable, like, but then like, oh, well, if you surround it with, stifles and chains and replenishes, and all of a sudden this card gets very exciting, right? So, I cannot, off the top of my head, imagine a context where I would want Tangarth's Glare.
But what if it had "draw a card" on it?
Oh, I get it. That's a different.
Well, that's
card,
what I'm
though.
saying.
Yeah.
That one line is all the difference. So to pull this back to Enchantress, a lot of these completely unplayable cards that cost a green suddenly become compelling when you have Enchantresses in your deck.
I think Elephant Grass is pretty good. Bob Maher told me he just never lost any games that have you ever drawn Elephant Grass.
It's a fun card. I mean, it's awkward because what Elephant Grass doesn't let you do that both Miri's Guile and Exploration do let you do is keep a hand with Forest, Argothian Enchantress, and Sarah's Sanctum.
yeah, that is one of the big points is gassing up Sarah Sanctum that Chris makes. I mean, he makes a good case. He lists a lot of reasons, and at that
He's
point,
put a lot of work into it.
All right, you just broke the Karsten hypergeometric math problem right now. I'm like, wait a minute.
yeah.
One of these things turns on land.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I think that it is very important to look at the card in the context and just be like, well, it draws a card and it turns on Sanctum and you have a lot of fetches. Like if your hand is like Miri's Guile fetch, like sounds like a keep. So I'll relent just because, like I said, I would have to play it and decide what I would want in the deck besides that.
I do love Sylvan Library. Sylvan Library is card advantage. It's an engine piece. And
you have to work pretty hard for it to turn into card advantage, though. You need to have a spare.
Not really.
Yeah, you have to have a spare 8 life kicking around.
So let me put this back to our earlier discussion about how if you have a way to collapse the game, Mox Diamond's disadvantage is basically not there. In a deck like Tropical Enchantress, assuming that you win on turn 4, it doesn't matter if you pay 8 life because the game's over. So in a deck like that, it actually breaks Sylvan Library incredibly effectively.
By turning it into the most painful Night's Whisper of all time.
Kind of, yeah, but it's you can play it on turn 2, play an Enchantress on turn 3, and end the game on turn 4. And once you do that, now if you can pay 12 life if the game is over before your opponent deals the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? I mean, I think it's definitely a fair point that if you are a green combo deck, Sylvan Library is certainly quite reasonable in that context as compared to others. And I think we've seen that because Fran has played Sylvan Library in his Alurin deck. I think it's reasonable to consider it for Bant Feb, blue-white, green Feb. So all interesting places to go.
kind of the green Final Fortune, or at least it has that mode.
Oh yeah. Now you're speaking my language. Let's go.
Oh man,
Final Fortune.
Now I love it. It's funny because earlier in this podcast I asked Rich what a bad color is, and he's like green. And he's like, now green has Final Fortune? Green has card advantage? Green has an engine?
Right. No, you're right. And I did mention 2 cards that were against that. You could oath into non-green cards, and you can blessing back your non-green cards. You can also use Sylvan Library to draw non-green cards. So
That's true. It's true.
That's a third awesome green
I
card.
honestly did not expect so much on this call. I didn't expect that Rich would talk so negatively about garbage decks, and then I didn't expect that
humans.
I didn't expect that green would be his least effective color in pre-modern. So you're hearing a lot of spicy Rich Shay takes here first on
bell
Swank
peppers,
On.
basically.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the Black got hobbled by the ban list. Like, it's kind of unfair because green gets all of its toys in pre-modern, and except Channel.
And Earthcraft.
Sure, and Earthcraft. But Black has Necro and Bargain and Yogwill and Tendrils. So, like, the things that Black wanted to do are just gone.
Why don't we just unban all those cards and see if anyone still plays pre-modern?
Well, no one will. That's the problem. They're too good. I mean, Black is probably the actual answer to that question, but
you're pouring one out for Necro.
I'm still going to go with green.
Atog Lord, what do you think about just unbanning Necro as an experiment? Well, I think unbanning Necro and Will.
Well, all right. Those are 2 separate things.
No, I want to unban both.
You want to unban both? Okay, there's no way that'll go well. The odds of either of them wrecking the format are high enough that if you have both of them come in at once, something catastrophic will probably happen.
Yeah, a different color will win.
The color will be black.
The color might be red.
Woo! Woo, I like this. Oh, wait, what if red had Yogwill? Oh, man. Can you imagine all the lava darts I could flash back?
Well, Lava Dart's the one card that has a built-in Yawgmoth's Will. Lava Dart, which I think we can all agree is just the best card in the format, is already going to...
Rich Shay had the Lava Dart art in the wall in the previous room he was in.
When Rich Shay was just like, it's basically a Swords to Plowshares that flashes back for 0 mana.
No, that was Aaron Dix who said that.
I thought Rich said it.
No, Aaron was trying to sell me on it, and I was
it's good. I mean, we don't need to fight about it. It's obviously good. Me, Aaron, and Rich are all on one side. You're going to earthquake yourself to death. I love you, Lanny, but you did X damage to yourself.
Or 2x if you have a Jackal Pup in play.
Yeah. No. I'm dead with the Jackal Pup trigger on the stack. Just don't get it twisted.
If only you had a Lava Dart flashback.
Hopefully you're dead too. To kill my own Jackal Pup? Okay.
So the quick, non-joking answer is I think Yawgmoth's Will is way too dangerous for this format.
If you just only unban Yawgmoth's Will, it's a blue card. That's my problem with it. But if you unban Yawgmoth's Will and Necropotence, it's also a black card.
Well, I think the only conceivable world where anything is possible is if we start with one of these cards and not just unleash both at once.
It has to be Necro then, because Yawgwill is way too good with
So Necropotence is... I love Necropotence. I won my first PTQ with Necropotence.
Same! 1996, November.
Ooh. Wow. It was either 99 or 2000 for me. This was back when they didn't give you a flight. They just said, here's $500, kid. So I did not go to the first Pro Tour that I qualified for because it was in Japan and I couldn't afford to go. I also didn't go to the second PT that I qualified for because that was also in Japan and I still couldn't afford to go.
You got to stop qualifying for Kyoto.
My first one was in Dallas, and my second one was in New York. So New York was not a.
Those are much more accessible.
Was not. I mean, Dallas I had to fly to, right? And then New York, obviously, I literally just stayed at my friend's house.
So if they unban Necropotence, it might be okay. I'm not sure it would be because it might be so unbelievably good that it warps the format, and now you have to play decks that beat it. But there's a non-zero chance that it would be okay. Sly probably gets better.
I think a lot of the things that have been said about land tax are like basically true about Necro. Mainly the one that favorably interacting with it is not very likely.
Agreed.
But you can. So I mean, obviously, I have the two biggest land tax apologists in the world on this podcast against me. But I think the main difference, and those cards.
The main difference is that you'll be able to play lands while your opponent overwhelms you with card advantage. Like the problem wasn't the overwhelming card advantage. The problem was just like you couldn't play lands. You're like, well, I would at least like to cast my Blastoderm, but you made it so that I can't get to 4 lands and I can't play Blastoderm without triggering.
People would have the sensation of playing Magic the Gathering.
That's true.
While you beat them. Instead of like land tax, you're just like, I can't do anything. You have Oath of Druid, so I can't play creatures. You have land tax, so I can't play land. You have Zerrin Orb, so I can't deal damage to you. Right? Like, how many copies do you play of those cards? I'm not even going to say, right?
So the first time
I can pay on turn 3, tap out, play my Necropotence, set aside 5 cards. You play your Blastoderm.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Let me tell you a little bit about a time recently when I heard the phrase, I just didn't play Magic. John Finkel is sitting across from Chris Picula. John Finkel's deck. Mono blue, Tinker, Urza, Rocks, and Koldotha Forge Master. He probably has Tolarian Academy. Maybe that wasn't in the.
This is in Cube.
The Cube packs. This is in Cube. Chris Picula's deck, black, red. I think there's probably Thoughtseize and a Flame Tongue Kavu and Dark Confidant. So I just entered the room. I was just like, hey, there's some stuff outside. You want me to bring it in? I'll bring it in. I walk over. And I have never seen a picture of Chris Picula outside of the card Meddling Mage. So it takes me until I hear the name Chris being mentioned. And then obviously I snap my attention to John and Chris's game. I'm like, this is going to be interesting. And I look over.
You were wrong.
Yeah. I look over. John has Koldotha Forge Master, which is just a tinker on a stick.
And it's too big to get FTK.
Yeah. Against Chris probably staring at the FTK in his hand, just saying, I wish I had a lava dart right now. And so Chris just says, like, what do you get? Blightsteel. And then, John activates and he gets Blightsteel. Next game. John's hand is Mishra's Workshop, Signet, Gilded Lotus type nonsense, like just a bunch of mana and like an Inkwell Leviathan. I don't even know. Chris thought seizes John and takes Signet, and John says, "Oh, that actually kind of disrupts how I was doing, because all of a sudden, instead of winning on turn 3, John actually needs to draw off the top of the deck. No matter, of course, because the top of John's deck is a mana crypt, and so he just casts some giant mana rock, and then I don't know, like it just doesn't even matter. Chris is like, do you know?
Part 3 of this story. So let's get part 2. But part 3 of this story, I was over John's on Wednesday, and John is just going off, and I wish I had a recorder. It would have been fucking insane to have John Finkel saying these words out loud, right?
Just like get him canceled.
It's not getting canceled. It's just really passionate, you know. Maybe some people would take it the wrong way, but
I invite 7 guys to draft at my house, and they all don't take Mana Crypt and Tinker. What the fuck is wrong with them?
No, so it's actually kind of like that. But his whole thesis is like Chris was saying, this isn't fun, right? Like what you're saying, like I didn't get
to play Magic, yeah.
And he's just like lists the cards that aren't fun, like Ancestor Recall, Mind Twist, or whatever. And John's like, the whole point of playing Cube is to abuse your opponent as badly as possible, right? Like using the most horrible combination of cards that Richard Garfield ever conceived of, right? Over the course of the last 30 years, jumbled together. And he's just so passionate about it. He's like, the whole point of Cube is to do this stuff. And I'm like, or to beat people with the red deck. And then John's like, you're right, Mike. The fun police is one of the best strategies, right? So Lanny and I did a podcast, so we got there late, right? So this is part 2. I sit down. Cam hands me his deck. He's like, all right, why don't you play? So you guys get a chance to play, right? So I play, and I have the experience of playing against the deck that has the special card that always lets them go first, getting my stuff free counterspelled twice, and he cast Ancestor Recall both games.
Yeah.
I believe he also had Library of Alexandria.
Yeah. Let's go.
So speaking of not playing Magic, I'm like, I'm going to get a Reanimator combo.
You're literally just describing getting Necroed. Like,
yeah. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my Reanimator combo. This is going to be fine. I have fine in air quotes. I've been Ancestral Recalled this game already. He's like, this is not going to go well for you, and he taps his Caracas. I'm like, well, all of the creatures in this fucking deck are legends.
This is actually a really, really good point regarding this ban list question. So I didn't do as well as I would have liked to in pre-modern, but I did okay at the larger event during the weekend.
You finished in what place? Was it third place, second place?
It sounds like it should be second place, right? Because don't you always get second place, Rich? I thought that was your thing.
Somewhere in the top 8, right?
I finally broke my streak of getting second place and did slightly better. It was really nice. I've come in second 3 times at the Vintage World Championship. I've come in second at Lobstercon in pre-modern. And I finally won this giant, ridiculous lobster trophy. And that is in a format where you do get Ancestral, then you do get Libraried, and you get Mind Twisted, and you get Balanced. Old School is... But you're signing up for that. You are signing up to just put on a rocket backpack and zoop around in the cosmos. Because there's no force of will, there are no there are not mechanisms to stop these things from happening. So you're just going to be playing this game where all of this ridiculousness happens, and the exciting gameplay comes around the edges while you're doing this. It's like there is really good gameplay. It's like eating meat but with bones in the dish. You have to kind of pick around the bones to get to the worthwhile meat. And the meat's very flavorful. But you have to acknowledge that you just can't, eat everything. So, I love that, and I enjoy Old School, but pre-modern shouldn't turn into that. And my fear is that Necropotence would just turn pre-modern into that, where the entire space collapses around this one card.
Yeah, your opponent's not going to play Magic. They're going to get Ritual Unmasked, Necroed, Unmasked, Arrest, and then it doesn't matter what happens afterwards. If it's a Skittering Scourge,
it's probably a Skittering
Tricks,
Scourge.
Like it just doesn't matter. Like they're gonna have no cards in hand. You're going to have 1,000 cards in hand. Well, 7, and then the game is going to be over, and it's going to be very reminiscent of another enchantment that
Yeah, but Lanny, how cool would it be that Firestorm will be one of the best cards in the format for a while?
I'm not even sure that you would need to Firestorm, because like who would bother playing creatures and attacking with the full knowledge that they're just going to get Necroed out of this?
Oh no. Here's the thing. Rich's thesis is that the red deck will get better. Man, is Firestorm good if people think the Jackal Pup is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's real good in that spot.
6 you, 6 your Jackal Pup, 6 this, 6 me. I don't care. 6.
So now we're going to have this horrible metagame of Necro, Sly, and Stasis.
Yeah. And
then no one will play this format ever again.
Oh, you know what, though? Mox Diamond is so good in the Firestorm Necropotence deck.
Mox Diamond is just good in the Necropotence deck.
Yeah.
In particular in the Firestorm deck.
Well, all of these Necro decks are going to have to play Mox Diamond. Who cares about 2-for-1ing yourself if you're drawing 7 on your end step?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'll cast 2 Mox Diamonds. I'll put a Lotus Petal onto the battlefield. It truly does not matter.
I'm glad we figured out what.
Oh man, if you had Will also, man, Mox Diamond would be so good if you had Will.
like I'm not even getting into Yawgmoth's will. That's just
we were just like talking about how good Sylvan Library can be when you're paying 4 life per extra card.
I think that if you put a gun to my head and said, Rich, pick a card to unban, I'm going to pick World Gorger Dragon.
Yeah.
What about Flash? Flash is like so inoffensive.
Suddenly Academy Rector goes to my graveyard. On your
What are you going to get? There's no Necropotence. There's no land tax.
No bargain.
So I think that you could figure out something pretty ridiculous to get against.
But maybe that's good. We already do ridiculous things, right? There's like most of the things that people are afraid of, like a fast symbiotic worm, is just worse than a dreadnought, right? They're just not worse than the things that we do already.
So I think that making Reanimator into a compelling deck would actually be the most interesting way to approach this. Because I think Dragon would actually unlock a Reanimator deck that's slightly better than what's there now.
It seems at least somewhat mid. Ty Thomason played World Gorger combo in middle school in the Romancing the Stones League. And I caught some of it, and I think he was playing against Necro Rock the game I watched. Incidentally. But
Necro Rock?
Yeah, just black-green Necro. But
why would you play the rock colors if you had that? Look, every time you tap your Land War Waste is one fewer card.
I am not going to make any comment on black-green Necro. All I know is that the commentators were just saying that World Gorger Dragon combo gets busted up by every single kind of interaction. Yes. Counter spells, graveyard removal, disenchants, and creature removal.
Yeah, so and when you have no permanents in play.
Yeah, exactly.
Your opponent has a sword.
Exploding car?
They can get you with the stifle. So I think
stifle, swords, disenchant, unsummon,
Crypts.
And you have no permanents in play. You've just exiled your whole board.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, if your opponent's in a losing position, they can force a draw. And then on the third,
is awesome.
And then on the third side, like, you know, I don't think World Gorger Dragon needs to be banned on power level. I think I am vaguely in agreement with Rich that the deck is quite cool. And it's interesting. It certainly isn't playable. It doesn't seem very playable in the absence of Entomb, honestly. Like, I don't know how we're finding this thing, getting into the graveyard, finding Animate Dead, then finding Laquatus' Champion, then finding Duress Unmask, etc.
This is what you have to do. You have to assemble all of these cards.
So for the second half of this podcast, which will be 6 hours long, I'll let you guys explore these ideas.
We'll call it. This has been a great issue of Spy Colony. It could practically be a 2-parter, but as you know, we just let her rip.
That's so much value.
I think this is a new record. We will see what the people think. If you're still listening, thank you so much.
You're still listening. The stats are going to say that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rich. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
This has just been a terrific time. Great having you on. I'm excited to see what you're up to. Honored that you chose to chat with us instead of playing in a tournament.
Thanks,
Same.
But
he just knows the hierarchy of.
Yeah. He knows just talking.
Soon you'll be gaslighted, Lanny.
Yeah.
Warning you.
One day I'll have some idea of what you mean, but that's okay.
Don't worry, you'll get Lanny canceled or something.
If I'm not already, love Spy Colony.
Love Mike. All right. Thanks, Rich.
All right.
Take care, Mike.